what we will be covering during this session and over the next few sessions is really thinking about what tools do you need to round out your education to become a profitable trader. And while there are a lot of different things that you might need to learn in order to get to a point where you can trade profitably, whether that's technical analysis or fundamental analysis or options strategies, we're not going to cover any of those things because those things, while important, are not the critical aspects or not the critical elements for how to achieve profitability. What we are going to spend our time during this session is talking about mindset, talking about how mindset prevents you from being profitable so that you have a shot at understanding of what you have to overcome in order to achieve profitability. Now, here at OptionsPlay, our focus on these education sessions every single Thursday is to empower you to trade sustainably and confidently. And that's what we strive to provide every single Thursday. So thank you so much, everyone, for those of you that are members that support us here at OptionsPlay, that allow us to continue to do this. For those of you that are currently new to OptionsPlay, I hope that these sessions provide you with something to take away from that help you achieve sustainability and profitability, and for you to be able to trade confidently and join us as members to support us. But before we get started, what we are going to discuss here today is purely for education and demonstration purposes. It is not a solicitation or recommendation to buy or sell any specific securities that we might use as example purposes during today's session. So what I want to kick off with is first discuss kind of what are my goals for this 4-part series. Now, while it's a 4-part series, 3 of them is going to be dedicated to this topic that we're going to be discussing. Next week, we will take a bit of a break to kick off earnings season. Second, who is the summit for? We're going to discuss, for those of you that are traders, whether you're a beginner, whether you're advanced, whether you've been trading for a few days or a few years, kind of who this session is for. Then I want to talk about the behavioral biases that we all tend to have and how we can overcome them, what it takes to have a balanced trading curriculum. You know, I see a lot of traders out there have what I call an unbalanced trading curriculum. They spend too much time learning one very important skill set and completely ignoring this other skill set that's incredibly important for successful trading. And that's what we want to help you understand is what does a balanced curriculum look like, and make sure you have access to that balanced curriculum. Then we'll talk about at the very end some of the ways to overcome these biases, and then we'll end this for Q&A here at the very end. Now, the primary thing that I want you to be able to walk away from today's session is a clear understanding as to how can I overcome the inability to consistently grow my account profitably. So many of you are logged in here today. Some of you have already chimed in into the chat window here. So for those of you that are brand new, please feel free to type in your name, where you're coming from. I see quite a few people joining from all over the world. I see South Africa, I see Germany, I see obviously plenty of people from North America. Please feel free to chime in and let us know where you're from. As you can see, there are many of you here in today's session, and I'd like to ask a quick question here for a lot of folks. How many of you feel that you struggle with gaining consistency in your trading account? Please type yes into the chat window if you struggle with gaining consistency in your trading account. And I fully expect to see a lot of yeses. And that's the reality of trading. That's the reality of investing. Is that it's not easy to get to a point where you are consistently growing your account. That's the reality of it. And having spent nearly 18 years of my life as a market strategist, it's not surprising to me why so many investors struggle with gaining consistency with trading. And from my perspective, It comes down to the fact that as I look at the landscape of tools, education, services that are available to traders, whether it's from your brokerage firm, whether it's from third parties, whether it's, at the bookstore, the curriculum is heavily, heavily skewed towards things that are important, but things that aren't essential to profitability, or things that are not, the reason that give, or rather the critical elements for helping you achieve profitability. The amount of education, the amount of books, the amount of materials that are available on the subject on mindset and risk management and those types of things, it's very, very small. And I do believe that it's small because traders don't think that they need it. Most traders think that, oh, if I just learn more about technical analysis, if I just follow someone else who tells me what to do, if I just, learn option strategies, I'll be successful at trading. Or if I just get better at technical analysis, or if I buy the right indicator, or if I use the right indicator that someone else tells me, some secret indicator, that I'll be successful at trading. Yet, time and time again, and many of you here today, hundreds of you here today have spent hundreds, if not thousands of dollars throughout your trading career on education, on courses, on services for all of these things. And many of you might have been doing it for years, yet you are still in this position where you feel that you cannot consistently grow your account. The reason that you're still in this place is not because you haven't achieved enough education, or that you haven't found the right service, or you haven't found the right indicator. None of that is the reason. The reason is because you haven't focused on the right thing, which is mindset. And no one talks about mindset because no one cares to talk about mindset. When I do sessions on mindset, and I've done the money show, I've done mindset things, webinars, money shows, sessions, not a lot of people show up to it. And I think that's the reason why there aren't a lot of books on it. There aren't a lot of sessions on it, because people just don't pay for it. People don't buy it. People don't value it. People don't think that they need it. Yet it is the one thing that differentiates successful successful traders from everyone else. And that's the first thing that people need to realize. Before you even spend the time to educate yourself on this front, is that this is what separates professional traders and successful traders from everyone else. If you think it's technical analysis, if you think it's that, you just don't have the right indicator, then unfortunately you're barking up the wrong tree, and you're going to continue barking up the wrong tree, going after different indicators, going after different services, going after different courses, and still failing to reach this point where you're consistently growing your account. If any of you can relate to this, please type 1 into the chat window. If you feel that you have spent endless amounts of time, money, resources on, chasing after gurus or technical indicators, or, technical analysis, fundamental analysis, option strategies, yet you still find yourself in this position. And I see a lot of ones here. So many of you that are here today are in the same boat. And it's for a very specific reason. And hopefully during today's session, during this series, that you'll learn as to how you can break that cycle and how you can get to that next point of actually achieving profitability. Okay, now I know that was a very long intro, but I think that is very important to first set the tone as to why we are here, and commend yourself for being here, and hopefully you'll be able to stay here during the next 3 sessions. So the question that I get from a lot of traders is, are these sessions recorded? Can I have access to the slides? And there's yes. You can access all of them at optionsplay.com / sign up. Sorry, the link on the screen that Philip just posted into the chat window is the correct one. That will give you access to the recording and the slides with the free 30-day trial to the OptionsPlay platform. I highly recommend that if you find yourself currently struggling with this, that you at the very least sign up for a free 30-day trial so that you can get access to the recording and the slides because this is arguably the most important education that you need in order to get yourself to the point where you are profitably trading in the market. And we'll come back to this slide here at the very end, but you can either point your phone on the QR code on the screen or click on the link that Philip posted into the chat window. So let's start with stating some goals. My goal is to empower you to grow your trading account and become a profitable trader with this session. It's very straightforward, very simple, and very clear. Now, there's two ways as to how I think we have to do what we have to do to achieve this. First of all, we need to give you confidence. Understand how your emotions influence your behaviors that contribute to wins and losses. Specifically, what emotions that influence which behaviors that make your wins smaller than you anticipate them to be, and what contributes to your losses to be larger than you anticipate to be. That's number one. Number two is consistency. Building the ability to stick to your plan regardless of the current market conditions and your current open positions, because that is really the state at which your emotions will start influencing your behaviors that contribute to your wins being smaller than expected and your losses being greater than you expect. So many of you are probably that have answered yes to the first question are familiar with this, where you have a certain perhaps trading plan, but it always ends up where your winners are a little bit smaller than you think they're going to be, and then you end up with a few large losers that are far larger than you originally anticipated those to be. How many of you can relate to that? Please type 2 into the chat window if you can relate to that specific outcome. And almost every single one of you that have answered number 1 will have answered 2, because that is really what contributes to not being able to consistently grow your account in the long run. So I think we're all in agreement as to where we are, where we stand, and kind of let's start talking a little bit about kind of what's required. Now, before I was talking about the fact that when I look at the landscape of what's available to traders, you look at what's available to you at your brokerage firm, you look at what's available to you on Amazon from a resources perspective, you know, whether that's books or courses, or if you just look at the general services that are offered from everyone, you know, on the internet, they tend to skew, you know, what looks like a pretty wide variety of services. But from my perspective, this is actually a narrow tranche of what you actually need, and it's actually focusing you on the wrong things. So there's a lot of stuff out there on technical and fundamental analysis, courses, services, that signal, you know, indicator providers, people who have custom indicators, blah, 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 research companies that are all dedicated to technical and fundamental analysis. And there are hundreds, if not thousands of them. Many of them are fantastic services with people with a lot of knowledge and a lot of knowledge from successful traders that are operating these services, providing these education services. Yet, despite these thousands of providers, despite many of you spending thousands of dollars on it, why is it that you have not achieved that profitability? Is it just because you haven't learned enough about technical analysis? Is it because you haven't found the right indicator within technical analysis? And I tend to find that that can't possibly be the reason, because so many of you have spent so much of your time and efforts on it, yet you still find yourself in this specific position. Second thing, option strategies and concepts. There are lots and lots of courses telling you about all different types of option strategies, from basic to advanced, volatility, concepts, best practices. Yet, despite learning about all of these, applying many of these, you still find yourself in the same position. Is it because you haven't learned some new strategy and you just haven't learned the right parameters of that strategy? I find that hard to believe. And thirdly, signal services. This tends to be kind of the not the easy way out, but someone saying, hey, you don't need to learn technical analysis, or even if you just have a basic understanding of technical analysis, a basic understanding of option strategies, that's good enough because I will tell you what to do. I'm monitoring the market. I have some secret indicator that tells me when to buy. I know exactly what option strategies to buy on the back of it. If you just follow me, you'll be profitable. And many times that person may be profitable themselves. Yet, when you follow them, you lack the ability to get the same result as they do. Why is that the case? Is it because that you haven't followed them close enough? Is it because you don't know what you don't have enough knowledge of technical analysis and options trading? Yet you still find yourself in this position. I also don't believe that to be the case. But when I look at the landscape of what's available to traders, 95% of it is concentrated in one of these three categories with regards to education and resources. Yet, despite all of it, it's not enough. Why? Because it doesn't focus on the one thing that really matters, which is mindset. Meaning, when you have a trade on and you're making money or losing money on that trade, none of these things, technical analysis, option strategies, signal services, tackle what you're going to feel when you are in a winning trade and what you're going to feel when you're in a losing trade. Because how you feel or how you feel emotionally is what contributes to those wins being smaller than they should and those losses being larger than they should. And none of these resources and education processes tackle that. Even signal services. When someone else tells you, buy this, sell that, what they're not walking you through is, how do I feel when I'm buying this? How do I feel when I'm selling this? How am I feeling when I'm holding on to this and not doing anything with it? And because they're not walking you through it, and because you're not understanding what they're doing, you're not going to exactly follow what they're going to do. You're never going to follow exactly what you're going to do because you don't understand it. And that is what's missing from the picture of education for traders. And that's what we plan on tackling here today. Does that make sense, everyone? Please type 3 into the chat window if that makes sense to you. And that's the one thing as traders that we don't think our feelings have such a large impact on our P&L, but I would argue that your feelings and your emotions have much, much larger impact on your P&L than your ability to look at the markets from a charting perspective or your understanding of an option strategy. The biggest contribution to losses is actually how you feel and the behaviors that you have as a result of how you feel. And that's what we're going to tackle. When I look at successful traders, and I've been doing this for 18 years, I've worked with thousands of retail and institutional traders over these 18 years. When I look at successful traders, it is almost never, ever due to some secret strategy or indicator that they have that somehow you just haven't seen yet or that you don't have access to. What consistently I see with successful traders is their ability to follow a trading plan consistently, and more importantly, what that means in terms of to follow a trading plan consistently is to regulate their emotions, especially during a loss. That is what differentiates successful traders from everyone else. It has almost nothing to do with their indicators, what services they're subscribed to, what data platforms they have access to, how much knowledge they have options. I will admit, successful traders typically have been doing it for a long time, have amassed enough of a deep understanding of technical analysis of options trading, but that's not what causes them to be successful. It's their mindset and their ability to regulate their emotions through their trading that allows them to consistently follow a trading plan. That is what contributes to success. Now, it is easy to create a trading plan. To say like, here's my trading plan, this is what I'm going to follow consistently, that is arguably incredibly easy to do. What is damn hard to do is sticking to it, because we're human and we often make the most counterproductive decisions when we are placed under stress. What does stress mean? When we're opening a position and the P&L starts to tick. And I will admit, modern trading platforms that give us tick for tick P&L calculations probably doesn't help the stressful position that we're in, where we can see down to the very second, oh, I'm up $100 now. Oh, I'm down $100 2 minutes later. I'm up $300 5 minutes after that. That doesn't help the emotional stress that we're in and the decisions that we have to make as a result of that. So the tools that we have access to today many times is very counterproductive to being able to stick to a trading plan. But this is really what helps you understand what you should be focusing your attention on outside of technical analysis and fundamental analysis and options trading. That's really going to contribute to you being profitable, hopefully within 2024. Does that make sense, everyone? Please type 4 into the chat window if that makes sense to you. Perfect. So this is really where, in order to kind of understand how we get to that point, we need to introduce a concept called behavioral finance. Many of you may have heard the term, casually, but what does it actually mean? So when we look at behavioral finance, it's really the study of our behaviors that with regards to money matters. And what you typically find with behavioral finance is that we act in surprisingly unpredictable and irrational ways. And there are thousands of examples of this, but a good example is when we walk into a store and we see an item that's on sale. It's an item that we never thought about buying. It's an item that we didn't think that we needed, but we end up buying it because it seems like it's such a great deal, right? So now we end up spending money on something that we never intended on buying. When we walked in that store, we went in for some milk and we walked out with a set of skis because for some reason there was a set of skis that were 60% off, and we thought that was such a great deal. This is a good example of behavioral finance, of how we as human beings act in very irrational ways when it comes to our money and finances. Another good example of this, and probably more relevant to traders, is a stock that you purchased starts free falling. What do? We don't say, hey, the investment that I thought that was a good investment is turning out to be a bad investment. I should get out. We think, oh no, it's gone down. It must go back up. Let me hold on to it. So what you do is you basically end up not only losing money in the investment, you also tie up the cash that continues to be in this bad investment for something what could be a better investment. And that's part of what contributes to underperforming portfolios for equity traders, right? Is that when we buy a stock, we don't, what we do is we can hold on to losing trades for years, hoping for that stock to get back to break even, because we just don't want to take a loss, not taking into account the fact that not only are we losing money on the trade, but the cash that you have tied up in this thing could be better invested somewhere else that could help you outperform, yet you are taking a chunk of your portfolio and continuing having that chunk of portfolio underperform. And that's why in the long run, your overall portfolio tends to underperform the overall market. These are all, simple examples or basic examples of how behavioral finance kind of looks at what behaviors we have that contribute to us underperforming our stated goals with regards to money and finances, and tries to help you overcome it. So understanding your biases and influences and quirks, kind of how they influence your decisions, is number one. And in order to trade profitably, we must understand ourselves and our behaviors so that we have a chance of overcoming those behaviors. Does that make sense, everyone? Please type 5 if that makes sense. Perfect. So let's take a look at some of these trading behaviors that actually contribute to this. So, and this is just a small sample of the things that I have heard in my 18 years as a market strategist that clearly contribute to this. How many of you have said that you currently are not consistently growing your portfolio. These are some of the things that I hear most common. Number one is the inability to take a loss and holding on to losing trades. This is by far the number one reason why most traders consistently cannot grow their account. We just as humans have a problem with taking on a loss, because taking on a loss means two things. It means that you are accepting the fact that an investment decision that you made or a trade that you made is wrong, right? So the views that you have in the market is wrong. And two, it solidifies the loss. It crystallizes the loss in your portfolio. Number two, taking profits early. This is something that another thing that a lot of traders will admit to. Hey, I got into a trade. I thought it was going to go to here, but as soon as it kind of moved in my favor, I took profits. I got scared. I thought it was going to perhaps reverse lower, so I figured I'm better off taking some profits, and I took it early. Next thing I know, the stock continued and reached my target eventually. But you know what? Guess what? At least I got some profits. I'm okay with that. Okay, makes sense. But what you have to understand is that what this does is it contributes to your wins being smaller than you think it should be, and then your losses being larger than they should be. And that is largely the two things that contribute to underperformance in the long run. Number three, taking partial profits. Okay, same thing as the one before, but instead of, I think the stock's going to go to here, but as soon as it moves here, I'm going to take some profits off the table. I'm still going to leave some left on the table, hopefully for it to move higher. But what you're doing is when the market is proving your views to be correct, you're doing the wrong thing. You're removing exposure. When in reality, you should be doing the other thing. When the market proves you to be right, you should be adding exposure. When you have a losing position, instead of cutting that position, what do? You add to that position. The idea is that, okay, I made it for trade. I think something was going to go up, but instead it started going down. So only if I bought some more over here and then it reversed higher again, then I'll be able to make my money or get myself back to break even. But sometimes that doesn't happen and the stock continues to free fall, right? And now what you've done is you've bought some stock here, bought some stock here, and the stock continues to drop. Now, again, your losses get significantly larger than you originally expect. Now, like I said, this is a short list of the different behaviors that I have seen that contribute to wins being smaller than they should and losses being larger than they should. And this is by no means a exhaustive list, and this list goes on and on and on, and I'm sure many of you can relate to at least one, two, or perhaps all of the ones that are here on this list. But there's one thing that all of these behaviors have in common, and the good thing is that they have one thing that's in common, and because they have one thing in common, it's something that you can start learning and training on how to overcome. And the common thing across all of these behaviors is trying to avoid pain. Meaning, as human beings, you are avoiding pain when we see these types of behaviors in your trading account. Your inability to take a loss, that's just not wanting to accept the pain of a loss. You don't want to accept the fact that an investment decision that you had was wrong. You don't want to accept the fact that you're going to take a loss on that investment decision. So the inability to want to take on that pain, or rather the desire to push that pain out till tomorrow or the day after, is what contributes to our inability to take a loss. Taking profits early, how does that have to do with avoiding pain? Well, it's because when a trade goes in your favor, if it then reverses lower and goes against you, it's incredibly painful to admit that and to see that. So what do we rather do? We'd rather take a small gain to avoid the pain that small gain turns back into a loss. Taking partial profits is another variation of that. Adding to a losing position is another variation of not wanting to accept the loss and now actually actively doing something to try to avoid that. And this behavior, adding to a losing position, hoping that you're going to get yourself back to break even, while that is a very detrimental behavior for a lot of portfolios, and many of you that have ever blown up a portfolio, you likely have done it in this fashion where a trade goes in your favor. It didn't quite move in the direction you expected to, so you added some more, hoping that you'll get yourself back to position. This behavior actually comes from the rest of our lives, because in every other aspect of our lives, when something goes wrong, what do? We take action to try to fix it. Something goes wrong with your marriage, you try to take action to fix it. Something goes wrong with your children, you try to fix it. Something goes wrong at work, you get your colleagues together and you say, hey, something's wrong, let's go fix it. Well, in most other aspects of your life, you have the ability to take action to try to fix something that isn't going correctly. But in the markets, that's the one place that your actions don't matter. It doesn't matter what you think or what you want it to do or how you want to fix it. you don't have control over the markets. The only thing you have control over is what you have exposure to in the markets and how much exposure you have in the markets. So, this behavior that I see of adding to a position is actually arguably, people thinking that they're doing the right thing. They're taking action. They're not just avoiding pain. They're actually taking action, hoping to fix it. But by doing so, you actually do the wrong thing, or you actually can contribute to far worse outcomes than you can. And again, this comes from the fact that in every other aspect of your life, you can take action and try to fix something. But unfortunately, in trading, this is the one place where taking action sometimes actually can do the opposite intended effect. And there is some action that you can take, but that action is not adding to your position. So right intentions, wrong outcome. Does that make sense, everyone? Please type 6 into the chat window if that makes sense to you. But it all comes down to our desire as human beings to avoid pain. And that is the one common theme you're going to start to learn from a behavioral finance perspective, is that if you want to be successful in trading, you have to start accepting that taking on pain and accepting pain is going to be part of the process. And if you keep avoiding pain, you're going to keep committing the behaviors that contribute to your wins being smaller than they should and your losses being far larger than they should. Okay? So a balanced curriculum, in my opinion, requires three primary things. First and foremost, by understanding buy and sell signals, understanding how to interpret the market to generate entry and exit signals. This can be done through technical analysis. This can be through fundamental analysis. This can be done through a combination of technical and fundamental analysis. In my opinion, to get started, you just need to have a basic understanding of technical and fundamental analysis. You don't need to have some secret indicator. You don't need to have some fancy schmancy Bloomberg terminal. You just need to have a basic understanding of these concepts to get started. Because, like I said, the difference between a really great trader and a fairly good trader is not going to be, a huge difference with regards to their knowledge of technical analysis or fundamental analysis for that reason. Those things can help and kind of help you get to that, the best possible version of yourself as a trader, but they're not going to be the reason that you're successful. So start with the basic understanding. Good enough basic understanding is good enough to get started. The second thing is a trading strategy. Once you have a buy and sell signal, what trades are you going to place? Are you going to buy the stock? Are you going to buy a call option? Are you going to buy a call spread? Basically, understanding basics of options strategies. I think that if you just have a basic understanding of two-leg option strategies, that is more than enough to get started with regards to options trading. But the third part, this is the part that I see almost no average investor spending any material time on, which is the emotional intelligence side of things. Managing your behaviors as you experience gains and losses, as you feel pain in your portfolio. And guess what? You get pain on both sides. You feel pain on when you as you have a winning position in your portfolio, and you have pain as a losing position in your portfolio. That's the kind of the irony of this, right? It's not just you feel pain when you have a losing position, and there's only people that have losing positions that feel pain, but you actually feel pain, arguably more pain, when you have a winning position, because you don't want that winning position to turn back into a loser by holding on to it for too long, right? That hurts perhaps even more, where a trade that you think is going to go correctly, it does go correctly, maybe doesn't quite go as far as you think it's going to go, and you just hold on to it. Next thing you know, the stock drops, some news comes out, and you now have to take on a loss. That hurts even more. So a lot of times what we do is the trade goes in our favor. Before it reaches our target, we start scaling out. We start taking profits because we want to avoid pain. So it's important to understand you're experiencing pain on both sides of the equation, whether a trade is going in the direction you expect it to, or if it's not going in the direction you expect it to. And how do you deal with each one of those scenarios is what's going to dictate whether you are a successful trader or not. And many of you can probably look at kind of your education that you've had up until now. I'm going to bet 95% of it is focused on this stuff. sometimes even 100% of it has been focused on technical analysis, fundamentals, and option strategies, and you've completely ignored, and you might not even have known about this area of trading and education that's required to help you become a successful trader. And this is really what I'm hoping in this session, is to really just illuminate how important this is, how important it is to have a balanced curriculum, and what you can do to start yourself onto the path of getting the right knowledge to put yourself onto the path of profitability. Now, how many of you, prior to this session, had no idea or had spent 0% of your time on this last element? Type yes into the chat window if you have spent zero amount of your education up until now on focus on kind of mindset, emotional intelligence, behavioral intelligence in your trading. And I'm guessing I'm gonna see a fair amount of yes answers here, saying that you haven't spent much time on this type of education. Okay, I see quite a few of you already chiming in and saying that is the case. And I think it's because this stuff is not sexy. This is the stuff that no one, arguably, this is the hardest part about trading. And a lot of people, they might kind of peek into it, think that, okay, I understand it. Okay, I understand I don't need more. But very few people actually take the time to actually dive into it, because it's the hard part. It requires you to dig deep. It requires you to think about what your behaviors are. And it's incredibly difficult for us as human beings to change our behaviors. But that is what it takes to become a successful trader. So some of the reasons that I see this type of education being overlooked by the vast majority of traders: number one, it's not, in my opinion, your fault. It's just limited education. And I think limited education comes down to the fact that successful traders are typically not focused on teaching. They're focused on trading. So they don't really have an incentive to teach necessarily. And I will say, when I have seen traders teach this particular topic, it's not well attended. Not a lot of people show up. Not a lot of people, think that they need this. A lot of people focus on the sexy stuff. People who say, hey, if you just follow my secret indicator, you'll win 90% of your trades. That's the stuff that sells. That's what people buy. When someone says you have to focus on your mindset, you got to focus on your behaviors, people don't pay for that. And that's why I think a lot of traders don't really focus on teaching this stuff, because not a lot of people think that they need it, not a lot of people pay for it, and kind of that is a self-fulfilling prophecy where there's not a lot of available education on it. So that's number one, why I think that there's not much education on it. Number two, it's easy to learn but incredibly difficult to internalize. So even for many of you that have followed me for the past few years, I spent many times teaching mindset, behavioral, risk management, things that are required for successful trading. But guess what? Those sessions are just not well attended. Not a lot of people show up. It's just, versus when I talk about technical analysis, when I talk about, specific option strategies, a lot more people show up for it. A lot of people are more interested in that stuff. And it's because the concepts are easy to understand, but they're incredibly difficult to implement. And a lot of people, will try it for a couple of days and just kind of go right back to their old behavior, because old behavior is easy to do. Changing your behaviors are incredibly difficult to do, because it requires you to face the uncomfortable. It requires you to dig deep and say that I'm not doing the right thing, or my behaviors are contributing to it. I'm the reason for it. It's always easy to blame someone else. It's always easy to say, hey, I follow this other guy who's successful in trading, and if I just follow him, I'll be successful trading as well. So if I don't make money, I'm going to blame him. I'm going to say he sucks, his analysis sucks, or this service sucks, or this thing that I subscribe to, it's not working. It's always easier to blame the external thing rather than blaming yourself. And I can say 95% of traders that follow someone else's trading that aren't successful, it's not because that other person's not successful. It's because even though you're following someone else's trading signals, you still have to deal with these behaviors. You still have to deal with the pain of the open positions that you have in your own portfolio. And guess what? That person who's dealt with all of this and managed to overcome all of these things, guess what? They're not hand-holding you through this every single trade and saying, hey, this trade, it's up, I know it hurts to hold on to this trade, but you got to stick with it. You got to hold on to it, because our profit target is here. We're not there yet. Hold on to it. And vice versa. When a trade is going in the opposite direction you expect it to, hey, I know it hurts to cut losses here, but you got to do it. If you don't do it, you could potentially face larger losses. No one walks you through that. And that's why, even though you follow someone else who quote unquote is profitable in their trading, yet you're not profitable by following them, guess what? It's much easier to blame them and say they're trading stocks or their signal stuff. It's much harder to say, hey, I'm the problem. I need to fix what my behaviors are contributing to my losses, or I'm not taking the time to learn the stuff, and that's why I'm not successful. It's really hard to do that. And even though hundreds of you are here today, many of you will leave this today and not look back on this and continue your education on technical analysis and options trading and not focus enough of your attention on this. That's just the reality of it. I've been doing this for 18 years. I'm by no means, think that everyone that's going to leave this session is all of a sudden going to spend their time focusing on this stuff, because it's hard. And someone else said it, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, right? But this is the hard stuff. This is the stuff that if you really spend the time learning, you have a real shot at being successful at trading. And if you don't, your chances of successful trading are very close to zero, because without it, your losses are always going to be larger than you think it's going to be, and your wins will always be smaller than they think they're going to be. And when your wins are smaller than they should and your losses are larger, you will always consistently underperform and be unprofitable in your trading. That's just unfortunately the reality of trading. So that is a good stopping point here for today. Like I said, this is something that we will be covering over the next few weeks as far as how to overcome this. We're going to talk about self-reflection, taking the time to regularly to evaluate your current past and trading decisions. There are many ways as to how you actually do this self-reflection. Some ways that many of you may some of you may have done, some of you may, think that it's completely cuckoo to be doing journaling and meditation, but these are some of the things that have helped a lot of traders through the years to kind of take a step back and think about what behaviors have I contributed to that contribute to unsuccessful trading. And, do I make decisions when a trade is going against me, where I push off accepting pain to the next day and end up holding on to a loss larger than I should? When a trade goes in my favor, do I, through the act of hoping to avoid pain, take winning trades off the table too soon? You have to ask yourself those hard questions, and that requires you to kind of take a step back, think about trades that you've recently made, wins that you've made, losses that you've made, and sometimes writing it down and saying, did I follow the rules that I expected, that I set out for myself? And if I didn't follow those rules, why? What was I going through? What was I feeling? What was I thinking at the time? And then the practice of meditation is something that also I practice myself. Not everyone does. Some people do. But meditation helps me in real time understand that I'm feeling a certain way, and I can recognize that and help hopefully have a shot at changing that behavior. Now, that is really kind of slowing yourself down and kind of feeling your feelings, so that when the next time you actually are feeling those feelings in real time, you have a shot at recognizing that and actually changing the behavior. Because these behaviors that we have are hardwired in us. We don't think through it. It's subconscious at this point. We don't actually feel pain. It's subconscious of avoiding pain, and we just immediately go off and take profits too early and leave losses going for too long. That's subconscious already. So in order to change those behaviors, they have to become conscious feelings and conscious behaviors. And meditation is one of the tools, at least for me, to do that. You might find other tools that help you achieve that. But for me, in order to bring something that's subconscious back into the conscious, that's really kind of what meditation allows me to do. And the third thing we're going to cover is position sizing. Position sizing is one of the tools that helps you stick to your trading plan. Because if you don't have the correct position sizing techniques, you will always find yourself in a position where the pain is too much and you will always revert back to these learned behaviors of pushing off pain too long and having your having your losers held on for too long and taking your winners off the table too quickly. And the only way that you have a shot at overcoming this is first having position sizing that fits your portfolio and allows you to accept that pain, because, pain is acceptable, but only within a certain threshold. And we have to set that threshold correctly so that we can actually accept that pain. And that comes down to position sizing. So over the next 3 sessions, next week, we're going to take a break from this, right? This is a lot to cover. This is a lot to take in. But next week, because earnings season is kicking off already, we're going to look at early reports for earnings season, and we're going to kind of set up for the rest of the earnings season next week. And then we're going to come back. We're going to talk about risk management. We're going to talk about position sizing. We're going to talk about the foundations of profitable trading and how to understand position sizing, the impact on profitability, and then how can you put it all together into one congruent plan that you can have to help you put yourself onto the path of profitability. So I hope that this session is illuminating for those of you that have not learned about this stuff before. For those of you that have learned about this stuff, I hope that this continues your education on this front, because this is by no means something that you learn once and you're set and good to go. If you talk to successful traders and profitable traders, they'll tell you this is something they work on virtually every single day, if not every single week or every single month as they look back on their trading. Because it's easy to always revert back to your old behaviors. That's just kind of what's ingrained in us. That's what's kind of fundamentally hardwired in us. So if we don't actively work on it, we revert back to it. So for those of you that are, and for many of you that are even successful at trading, this is still incredibly important for you to learn and revisit from time to time, because this is kind of what keeps you on track of continuing and staying profitable in your trading. So I hope that this is helpful for those of you that are here today. I hope that you join me for the next few sessions and make sure that you are following through on this journey to help put you onto the right path for 2024 and your ability to be successful in trading. So I'll leave this with, if you want access to the recording and the slides, they are available. Philip will put a link onto the screen. For those of you that are members, you have access to the recording and slides. By tomorrow morning, we will send you everything so you can follow along. Like I said, this is an incredibly deep topic. It takes time to internalize. It takes time to understand, and then it takes far more time to internalize. And this is why having access to the recording and slides are good for you to review this and learn this at your own pace. So if you're already a member, or if you currently have a free trial, you will get access to it in an email to you tomorrow morning. If you are here for the first time, or you're just here learning about OptionsPlay for the first time, you can sign up for a free trial at optionsplay.com/signup, or point your phone to the QR code, and that will allow you to sign up for your free 30-day trial. That'll give you access to OptionsPlay, give you access to all the resources that we have here to help you become a profitable trader, and access to the recording and slides in that email tomorrow morning to our members. So with that, what I'll do is I'll open this up for Q&A for about 10 minutes or so before I have to sign off. And please, if you have any questions, type your questions into the Q&A window. There's a chat window and a Q&A window at the bottom of your screen. Please bring up the Q&A window, and I will try to answer as many questions as possible out of that session. Thank you so much to everyone. Happy New Year to everyone. I am happy to be back. And yes, thank you so much for the wishes for the new baby. Thank you so much. David's asking a great question. He's asking about our daily plays, which is kind of the signal service that I'm referring to here before, right? And this is kind of one of our biggest problems with signal services, including our own, is that, these signal services that tell you kind of what to buy, what to sell, and kind of telling you kind of some of the things that we're trading What it doesn't walk you through is this emotional element that I'm talking about. And a lot of traders will just follow it blindly and say, hey, you've had some losing trades. I've lost money. This service sucks. Every single signal service suffers through the same thing because we can't walk you through how we're feeling, even though we try to write about it to some degree as to, hey, this trade is going in our favor and now it's time to add to the position. Now it's not time to lose position. People don't read the paragraphs of kind of how we're feeling and how we're, thinking about a specific thing. So, we end up getting a lot of complaints about our signals trading service. So we're in the process of rethinking how we can provide ideas to you, things that are valuable to you, yet aren't detrimental from that perspective, because someone coming in for the first time following it blindly isn't just going to say, hey, you've had a few losing trades, this server sucks, I'm going to cancel. So we're in the process of rethinking that. So this is something that we are currently actively working on. I'm taking an active role in that, and we'll hopefully have something back to you by early next week. Limiting losses, not running losses. Yes. So thought option losses are limited to premium. Yeah, it is, right? So just because your option losses are limited to premium in certain strategies, right? Whenever you're buying an option, your options losses are limited. That doesn't mean that you didn't trade too many contracts to begin with, right? So yes, you're limited to, let's say, $1,000 per contract, but if you trade 10 contracts, that's $10,000. Can your portfolio survive a $10,000 loss? It's not to say that it's limited. It's to say that you are losing more than you intended to, right? Maybe, for example, you have a $100,000 portfolio, and anything more than $2,000 worth of losses is going to contribute to underperformance of your portfolio. It's holding on to trades longer than you should, right? Just because you can lose $10,000 doesn't mean you should lose $10,000. Maybe by the time you've lost $3,000 on a trade that you could lose up to $10,000 on, you should be getting out of that trade. But what's preventing you from actually getting out of that trade? That's really some of the things that I think are worth looking at. I understand the emotional side and the rethinking. I just wanted to know I wasn't missing anything. I'm not sure what you mean by that, David. Like I said, what I find missing from a lot of investors is even this education on what how emotions affect your behaviors, specifically what specific behaviors and how to overcome those behaviors. That is not something that's generally speaking covered very well, in my opinion, for most traders and most trader education. Most trader education tell you about technical analysis, fundamental analysis, building a trading plan, stop losses, take profits. That's the stuff. The mechanics, and the mechanics are important, but it's not the essentials. Or rather the most critical infrastructure that's required to be a successful trader. But your losses before you start with options. Yes, and that's assuming that you are planning your losses accordingly. Most traders don't, right? Just because you know your losses doesn't mean that you should hold your trades until the full loss either, right? We almost never do. Just, you want to be able to manage your losses before they reach their max loss. Now, if you are sizing correctly and you are sizing it where the max loss of your trade is within 2% of your overall portfolio, so no matter what, even if the worst case scenario, you're only losing 2% of your trade, yes, you can hold on to your losses and never have to worry about managing losses. You're absolutely right. But I don't know of a single trader that does exactly that. No single trader, I think, does exactly that. Traders always tend to, as they get a little bit more confident, have some wins, start sizing up their trades, because no one wants to trade one lots all the time and forever. People think that, hey, I've had 4 or 5 winning trades in a row. I'm really getting good at this. Let me start sizing up. Next thing you know, sizing up contributes to much larger losses in your portfolio. That is the behavior that I see over and over again. And unfortunately, for people who think that this is not important or this is not something that they need, in their portfolios because, oh, options already limit my losses. Unfortunately, those are the traders that in the long run tend to underperform in their portfolios and say that I cannot consistently grow my portfolio because they just don't spend enough time understanding this and uh, overcoming these behaviors. It's not just one. It's a whole slew of behaviors that contribute in conjunction with each other to underperformance. Have you done or will you present content on how to create and execute a trading plan? Anthony, I've done quite a bit of this stuff, and we've actually written blog posts on our platform specifically on it. So we will um, I will be writing more of this content here in the next few coming weeks specifically on this. So yes, I will be putting more of that stuff. And so this is some of the stuff that we will be covering in the last session during this trading summit. Trading involves your decisions. You go in and out. Even when you make little, you get out and you leave money on the table. That is very challenging. There's no doubts about this, that this is arguably one of the most challenging things that you will deal with, you will have to learn in your life. It's not easy. There's no part of this that's easy. But the thing is that most traders are going into this not even having this education. It's not easy when you have this education. Imagine trying to do it without even knowing about this stuff. That's kind of what I think is shocking. And that's what scares me about it, the thousands and thousands of traders that start every single day, not even knowing that this type of uh, education exists, that this type of stuff is necessary for trading. Let alone the people who know it and kind of are struggling with it. At least now you have some understanding and you have the ability to follow up with this and try to overcome this stuff. When you have that knowledge, it's hard. But imagine going into it not even knowing this knowledge. So hopefully that's kind of what I'm trying to do, is to at least illuminate that this is an area of trading that I see most traders lack and that you need to start adding to your education. If I want to follow the strategy of 45 days and take 50% profit and it goes too fast to target price and it's at 34% profit, should I wait to take 50% profit? So one, this is a very specific question with a very specific scenario. It's hard to answer that definitively without looking at the type of trade that you're making. I'm presuming you're talking about, selling an option strategy in this particular case. But the short answer to your question is yes. When you but I will say that, when trades go in your favor, you have a little bit more flexibility than when trades go against you. When trades go against you, there's no flexibility in the rules. If you don't follow the rules, you will underperform. There's no doubts about that. When trades are going in your favor, you have a little bit more flexibility. You have a few more optionality. Do you want to take profits at 34%? Yes, maybe you do want to take profits, but you want to perhaps roll, if it reaches your profit target too early or too fast, then you might want to take profits on the current position, but establish a new position, right? So it's not as black and white versus when the trade goes in the direction that in the opposite direction, it's very black and white. Cut losses, move on. When rules are clear, it's not as hard to block out emotions, but emotions especially come into play when the decision of what to do depends is ambiguous and may vary depending on the situation. Any advice around that? Yes. So like I said, the rules for on a loss is very clear cut and black and white. There should not be any emotions, even though there are emotions involved in it. When a trade goes in your favor, there are a lot more options, but they're not really ambiguous. There are just multiple options that you can take. And it depends on kind of how far you think the stock can continue to go in the direction that you expect it to. So that just comes with experience. And unfortunately, you're not going to build that experience if you don't first follow some of these basic rules. So start with the basic rules, follow them, and as you follow them, you'll find yourself getting to the point of breaking even. And if you break even, you'll have that time and experience to kind of start working on these variations when the trade does go in your favor. And those are some of the things we're going to cover in weeks 2 and 3, which is actually session number 2 of how to grow your trading account, where we focus on risk management. This is really where we focus on kicking off your 2024 and making sure that you have the tools, you have the education to put you onto the path towards profitability. And in session 1, we really focus our attention on understanding how our emotions affect our behaviors that contribute to underperformance of our portfolios. And today we're going to break that down further. We're going to look at 2 key components in session 3 and session 4. Today we're going to focus more so on the loss side of things that cause us to underperform in our portfolios, specifically why losses end up typically larger than we plan on our trades. And we're going to talk about why that happens and what we can do to combat that. Now, the great thing about today's session is that everything is going to be fairly black and white. The rules that you're going to learn are very simple to understand, simple to implement. They may be difficult to really wrap your head around and really get into to implement them, but the rules themselves are incredibly simple, so easy to understand. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, just for those of you that are new to OptionsPlay, we host these sessions every single Thursday afternoon, our OptionsPlay education sessions, and our sole focus, our mission here is to empower you to trade sustainably and confidently. Every single Thursday, we are here to help you understand how to better yourself as a trader. And today we are focusing, or rather the month of January, we're focusing on the aspect of trading education that I think is most often overlooked by most traders, not because you don't want to focus on it, but because naturally there's just not a lot of education on it, which is the behavioral side, the risk management side, the position management side of things, how that greatly affects your profitability. I see too much education on technical analysis, fundamental analysis, option strategies, not enough on this. So I'm really focusing this the start of 2024 on this incredibly important aspect of your trading education to put you onto that path of profitability. But before we get started, what we are going to discuss here today is purely for education and demonstration purposes. It is not a solicitation or recommendation to buy or sell any of the specific securities that I'll be using as example purposes during today's session. So I'll kick off by just reviewing what our goals for this January summit is going to be. And now what we're going to break it down is, what does it take to grow a trading account? We're going to talk about wins and losses, but like I said, today we're going to focus more on the loss side of your portfolio and how that contributes to underperformance and profitability. We're going to talk a little bit about the trading game. It's important to understand what game you're playing in order to play the game correctly. And a lot of you think we're playing a different game than the actual game that we're playing. And once you kind of realize that, that's when the light bulb really clicks for many of you who either have learned this in the past or have learned sessions with me in the past, or if this is your first time, this is the light bulb that hopefully clicks for you, that gets you to think about trading and losses in a different way, that helps change your behaviors and switches you towards thinking about the right mindset and the right path towards profitability. We'll talk about the rules of that trading game and some of the daily the signals and process that we have here. And ultimately, we'll end this with a question and answer session here at the very end. But the primary thing that I want you to be able to walk away from today's session is a clear understanding as to what risk management techniques can you deploy to ensure that your ability to grow your trading account in the long run. Or rather, I think another way to word this is, what risk management techniques can you deploy to ensure that you don't underperform, that you don't blow up your accounts, because that is what I see most common in my 18 years as a market strategist, working with thousands of retail and institutional investors. Where do trading accounts go wrong? And most of the time it goes wrong on the risk management side, on the downside, when losses become too large, when losses become impossible to overcome. And today we're going to talk about the math behind it and why it's so black and white and why it's actually incredibly easy to avoid if you think about it the right way. But most of us don't think about it the right way, which is why it's so difficult to actually implement some of these really simple rules that can help you prevent underperformance in your portfolio. Now, I see a lot of you have already chimed into the chat window. Most of you have joined us here before that you have chimed in. If you're joining us today for the first time, please feel free to bring up your chat window. Let us know who you are, where you're from. As you can see, we have attendees from just about everywhere around the world. Canada, obviously quite a bit in North America, but I'm seeing Copenhagen, I'm seeing quite a few other countries joining us here today. So please, if you're joining us for the first time, feel free to chime into the chat window. As you can see, there are hundreds of you here learning the same thing. And I'm so glad that many of you are here today because, like I said, this is arguably the most important lesson for traders to learn if you want to put yourself onto profitability. Okay. Now, let's kind of kick off by addressing one question that I get across all of these sessions, which is, can I get the recording and the slides for these sessions? And the answer is yes. We record these sessions. We give you the slides to all of our members and anyone who has access to OptionsPlay completely free of charge. If you don't have an OptionsPlay account, you can sign up for a free trial by following the link in the chat window that Philip is going to post into the chat window, or you can put your phone into the QR code, which points you to optionsplay.com/sign up. I'm sorry, it should be OptionsPlay sign up, not OptionsPlay /grow. I apologize. So Philip has got the right link in the chat window. That will give you a 30-day free trial to the OptionsPlay platform, which will give you also access to everything that I'm going to show you here in terms of tools, but as well as the recording and slides, which we send out over the weekend after each of these Thursday sessions. So if you want access to the recording and slides, which I find is going to be incredibly important, especially for these sessions, because what you learn in these sessions takes time to internalize, and it takes some time of self-reflection. Sometimes after you listen to the webinar, you watch the recording, go through the slides, that's really when you're going to find your ability to have all of this click and actually think about implementing it for your portfolio. Okay, so let's quickly just review, what I see as goals for this session. First of all, our goal is to empower you to grow your trading account and become a profitable trader. That's as simple as our mission for this trading summit. We want to make sure that you have the tools that put you onto the path of profitability. Now, how many of you here, there's a few hundred of you here in this session here today. How many of you are currently struggling to get yourself to profitability in trading? If you are, please type yes into the chat window if you're struggling to get yourself onto the path of profitability from trading. Okay, I see a lot of yeses, and this is pretty common, in my 18 years of working with traders, of just seeing so many traders, and many of you, despite saying that you're struggling with getting to profitability, have probably spent months, years, potentially thousands of dollars to learn how to trade, right? Whether it's technical analysis, whether it's fundamental analysis, whether it's option strategies, whether it's services where you follow someone else to trade. If that resonates with you, where you feel that you have spent an enormous amount of energy, money, time learning how to trade, yet you're still here, please type 1 into the chat window. It's not just, hey, I just started yesterday, so I'm struggling right now. I haven't just gotten to it, but many of you have spent countless hours, time, money, different techniques, different services to hopefully get yourself onto the path of profitability, yet you still find yourself in this position. And this is really why I keep going back to traders and saying, it's not your knowledge that's holding you back. It's not that you don't know enough technical analysis. It's not that you don't know enough options strategies. It's not that you don't have access to some secret indicator or some secret strategy that someone else has, that profitable traders have access to that you just don't. Because if that was the case, then all of you that have spent that time and effort and money on signals and indicators, you would be profitable. Yet the vast majority of clients that I work with that have gone through that still have not reached profitability. It tells me that those are the things that are not what's going to contribute to profitability. It's something else. And that something else is something that's not commonly taught. And we'll talk a little bit about why, but that's why I'm here to teach that something else. That's why I'm here to talk about that something else, because that something else is what contributes to the difference between profitable traders and unprofitable traders. So let's talk about two things that I'm going to try to help you build. Number one is confidence. Understand how your emotions influence your behaviors that contribute to wins and losses. Specifically, behaviors that make your wins smaller than you anticipate them to be, and behaviors that cause your losses to be larger than that you anticipate to be. Because we all plan to have small losses and bigger wins, but for some reason at the end of the day, when we tally everything up, our wins end up being smaller than we think, and our losses always end up somehow being larger than we think. And that is a big part of why we lack the confidence and the ability to trade in the markets. The second thing is building consistency, the ability to stick to a plan regardless of the current market conditions and current open position. Because what happens is that we have a plan, but once we have a winning position, once we have a losing position, and we're seeing the P&Ls tick in our portfolios, something takes over from an emotional perspective, from a behavioral perspective, from our trading plan. And that is when we almost always deviate from our trading plan. And what happens is very simple. Our wins that we think is going to be this big, or a plan is going to be this big, ends up being smaller. And our losses that we plan are going to be this small end up being this large. Okay. And if any of you can also relate to that, please type 2 into the chat window. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to talk about this. And today we're going to focus on one side of it, and the next session we're going to focus on the other side of it, okay? And we're going to focus on the easier, rather simpler side of things today. So what does it take to grow an account? It's actually arguably incredibly simple, right? You need to have consistently where your total wins weighs your total losses. That's it, right? It's a really simple mathematical arithmetic equation. Total wins has to be larger than total losses over whatever period of time you look at in order to reach profitability. So in theory, it sounds really simple, right? But like I said, what ends up happening always is that our losses end up being bigger than we expected to, and our wins typically end up being smaller than we would like them to be. So today, what we're going to focus on is the loss side of things. Next week, we're going to focus on the winning side of things, because the behaviors that we have with each side is different, and I want to tackle each one separately. So today, we're going to talk about why our loss is larger than we anticipate them to be over the long run, and what we can do to combat that and avoid some of those things. So generally speaking, there are two things that contribute to losing that confidence and losing your ability to feel that you are onto the path of profitability. Number one is big losses, meaning you have a loss that's so large in your portfolio that you've blown such a huge hole in your portfolio, it's very difficult to come back from without either redepositing more money into your trading account, or now you're forced to trade considerably smaller position sizes than you were originally trading. And that makes it incredibly even harder to get yourself back to where you were and back to profitability. So the emotions that lead us to hang on to losers for longer and adding on to losing positions, those are the things that typically contribute to big losses. So you say, hey, I put on this position. If this trade goes to a certain point, I'm going to cut my losses and move on to the next trade. What happens? The position moves against you. What do? You don't take that loss, right? You don't say, I'm going to take that loss. You still hope that that position is going to come back. So you say, I'm going to hold on to it for one day longer, or a few days longer. You basically kick the can down the road because you want to avoid the pain of taking that loss today. And what ends up happening, occasionally that trade does end up working in your favor and you kind of get back to break even, or maybe end up even with a win. But more often than not, in the long run, the problem is that the behavior that you have of deviating from your trading plan, if you keep deviating from your trading plan, your losses will end up being larger than you anticipate in the long run. Now, I'm certain that most of you can relate to that. Please type 3 into the chat window if that makes sense to you. Now, that is one of the most common, I would say, traits that we see traders have with regards to why losses end up being larger than they should. The second thing is more damaging, but arguably more active, and actually speaks to investors who are quite smart, who are trying to do something but end up hurting themselves even more in the long run, which is adding to a losing position. Meaning, you think a stock is going to go higher, so you have a long position, but instead of the stock going higher, it ends up going lower. So what do? Instead of just saying, oh, I'm going to hold on to it, hope that it gets back to break even, you now add more exposure. You buy some more. You're thinking to yourself, okay, it's so oversold now, it's got to bounce. And even if it bounces a little, because I bought more, I'll get myself back to break even faster, right? Now, this is actually active. This is you actively doing something about the losing position. And the interesting thing from a psychological perspective is that in all other aspects of your life, when something goes wrong, what do? You take action. You say, hey, something's not going in the direction I expected to. Let me do something about it. Whether it's professionally at work, whether it's in your personal life, if something is not going in the direction you expect it to, you do something about it. You get your partner, you get your colleagues, you get your friends, whatever it is, you do it yourself. You try to fix the problem, right? And that's good. That's a good thing in every other aspect of your life. When things go wrong, you actively try to fix it. But the problem is that in markets, you can't fix a trade that's not going in the direction you expect it to. If you think Apple stock is going to go up, but it's going down, there's nothing you can do to fix Apple stock going down. And that is the fallacy that we have from other aspects of our life, where we can fix things that we try to apply to trading that ends up actually hurting us more in the long run. Because inevitably what happens is that once, twice, 3 times, sometimes this strategy works out, but you're always going to have a time where this strategy, instead of bouncing higher, it ends up continuing going lower. Maybe you add some more and the stock continues to go lower. That's really where you, instead of risk, maybe $2,000 in the first trade, and you said, I'm going to lose $2,000. By the time you end it, you're down $10,000 in your trade. This is less common, but actually still fairly common in traders. And if you can relate to that, please type 4 into the chat window, where you actively think you're fixing the problem, but by actively fixing the problem, you're actually making it worse. And again, psychologically, it's because we do this in every other aspect of our lives, because generally speaking, we can fix a lot of things in our lives. But unfortunately, when the stock is not going the direction you expect it to, you're not going to be able to fix it. And that fallacy that you think you can fix it is what contributes to having these huge losses in your portfolio, okay? So big losses is a very, very large contributing factor to why people underperform or don't find themselves capable of getting themselves onto the path of profitability. Now, we're going to talk about how to fix this in a second, okay? The second thing is consecutive or consistent losses. This is really where emotions lead us to give up on a strategy and move on. What do I mean by this? Maybe you subscribe to a service, maybe you learned a new strategy, and now you're starting to trade that strategy, you're starting to implement that strategy. And inevitably, maybe it goes really well the first couple of months, and all of a sudden you come across a string of losing trades. 5 losing trades, 6 losing trades, 7 losing trades, right? Whether it's an overall strategy that you're following, whether it's a signal service that you're subscribing to. And what happens is that you have a string of losers and you start to lose faith in the strategy. And this is really the other aspect of our emotions that we have a really tough time dealing with is consecutive losses, right? You might have signal services or strategies that claim 60 70% winners. So how do you have 7 consecutive losing trades in a row? Well, this is really where, if you look at the mathematics behind profitability in the long run, that's exactly what it is. It's profitability in the long run. It doesn't mean that in the short run, you won't go through pain, that you won't suffer through losses. And anyone who's profitable in trading knows that consecutive losses happen, and your role as a trader is not to prevent it. Your role is to survive it. And we'll talk a little bit about how to survive it, because no matter how great your strategy is, you're going to always come across a string of losers. So again, your role as a trader is not to prevent consecutive losses. You can't prevent consecutive losses. It's like flipping a coin. Flipping a coin has a 50-50 shot of heads or tails, yet it's very common that you're going to see a string of 5, 6 heads or tails in a row. And what you have to do as a trader is you can't avoid it, but you have to know how to survive it. And that's really the mindset that you have to take with trading. And this is something that we're going to tackle here in the next slide, which is a concept called infinite versus finite games. So before, at the very beginning, I said trading is a game, and you have to understand what game it is in order for you to play that game and play it well. Okay, so in the 80s, there was a NYU professor who wrote a book called Finite versus Infinite Games. And he was actually a religious philosopher. He wasn't a business executive or a trader. He was a religious philosopher, but he wrote this book called Finite versus Infinite Games. And in the book, he theorized that there's 2 types of games in the world. There are finite games and there are infinite games. Finite games are games that have fixed rules. The game ends at a certain point, and based on those rules, when the game ends, you declare a winner or a loser. And the goal when you play a finite game is to simply win at that game. A good example of this are basketball, football, chess. These are all games that have fixed set of rules. The game will end at a certain point, and based on the rules, at the end, you will declare a winner or a loser. So when you're playing basketball, you're playing chess, you're playing football, what you're wanting to do is you want to win. That is your goal, and you want to do everything at all costs in order to win. So that's a type of game that we're all familiar with. And that is a game that we sort of resonate with when trading, right? Because there's a lot of wins and losses. You think about win rates and winning, and you would think that when you're trading, the goal is to win. Yet there's a second type of game that he theorized, and he said there's infinite games. In an infinite game, there are no agreed upon rules. In an infinite game, it never ends, and there's no such thing as winning or losing. There are either players in the game or dropouts in the game. And a good example of this is running a business. Think about running a business. There are no rules to running a business. It never ends in terms of running a business. And you either are in business or you are out of business because you no longer have the resources to stay in business. And when you're playing an infinite game, your goal is not to win. There's no winning in an infinite game. Your only goal as an infinite game, playing an infinite game, is to continue playing, is to make sure that you have the resources to continue trading. And a good example of this, a good parallel to this, is actually trading. Because when you're trading, one, there's no agreed upon rules. Trading never ends. It always continues on. And your role as a trader is not to win at trading, because there's no such thing as winning at trading. You can win one trade, but that's not what you're here to do. You're not here to win one trade. You're here to win long term, or rather in the infinite game, which is your goal is to stay in the game. Your goal is not to win. Your goal is not to lose. Your goal is to stay in the game. And that is a fundamental shift to how you think about trading, because many of you think about trading as trying to win. But if you think about it, there's no such thing as winning. Making money is not winning. Your goal is to make sure that you continue playing. And most of you fail at that mindset of continuing playing. And because you think about winning and losing, what ends up happening is that you're effectively playing the wrong game and you're having the wrong mindset to how you're approaching the game. And having the wrong mindset is what contributes to us continuing to think about wins and losses and wins and losses. And that's not what you need to be focused on. Your focus is on continuing to play. And what does it mean to continue to play? What it means to continue to play is basically don't blow up your account, right? Just like how when you're running a business, it's basically saying don't go out of business. Don't basically have too many expenses that outweigh your profits that you have to basically shut down or declare bankruptcy of your business. It's the same concept with trading. And when you think about it from that perspective, that your goal is to continue trading, now your priorities and what you do in terms of just what your priorities are and how you think about each trade changes. And this is the light bulb moment for traders that you have to go through if you want to get yourself onto profitability. And I would say when you're first introduced to this concept, you understand the words I'm saying, but you don't understand it internally yet. And it takes time to reflect and it takes time to really internalize this before it makes sense to you that, oh, trading is a completely different mindset than winning and losing, because most of us, when we first get into trading, we're stuck in this win versus loss mindset, which is a finite game. We're not playing a finite game. And when you're playing an infinite game within finite game mentality and finite game rules, you end up being a loser in the infinite game, or the person who goes out of business, or the person who blows up their trading account. And there are so many different parallels of infinite games in your life. Your marriage, running a business, trading. These are all infinite games, and you have to approach them in a very different way. Like, think about if you approach your marriage as just wins and losses, like, arguments that you're winning and losing. If you think about your marriage as winning and losing, guess what? You probably won't stay married for very long. Same thing with running a business, and same thing with trading. And that is the mindset change that you have to make. And like I said, easy words to understand, very difficult to internalize sometimes. It takes some time to kind of do that introspection and that reflection to understand what that really means of focusing on something different than winning and losing. Okay, so let's talk about how to actually achieve this, right? And or what are some of the rules that you can apply to actually think about that infinite game? And like I said, when you play an infinite game, your goal is to stay in the game and make sure that you don't drop out. So how do you make sure you never drop out? And this is really where we have a very simple rule to help prevent you from doing this. And that's the golden rule of trading. Now, the golden rule of trading is very simple. Never risk more than 1 to 2% of your entire portfolio on any given trade, which means that if the trade that you are currently placing goes completely south in the opposite direction that you expect it to, that should never wipe out more than 1 to 2% of your total portfolio value. That's how you sustain continuing to play, because no matter what happens, no single trade, no single event, no single bad luck will cause you to basically blow up your account and cause you to go out of business or blow up your trading account and not be able to continue playing the game. And this has a few different important aspects. Number one, small losses are just simply easier to let go of and accept, right? So you risk a small percentage of your portfolio and the stock that you thought was going to go up goes down. Guess what? You've lost a small percentage of your portfolio. You're not as emotionally attached to that one idea or that one trade. You're not monetarily attached to that one idea or one trade. And you simply are going to be able to let go of a loss much easier when they're small than when you have, let's say, a trade that's risking 10, 20% of your total portfolio. If you have a trade that's riding, that 20% of your entire portfolio is riding on one trade, guess what? You're going to be emotionally and monetarily tied to that trade. And you're going to have a very, very difficult time to let go of that loss if it does start to go against you. Does that make sense, everyone? Please type 5 into the chat window if that makes sense to you. And there's a lot of math behind why 1 to 2% is the rule. And even when you go from 2 to 3%, the risk of you blowing your account grows exponentially. for every 1% more you go in terms of risk, the probability of you blowing up your account grows at an exponential pace. So 1 to 2% puts you basically at that lower end of the curve. So your probability of blowing up your account for every 1% you go doesn't grow linearly, it grows exponentially. So what we're trying to do is make sure that you stay on this end of the curve so that no matter what happens, even if you have a large number of losers, you're able to survive that. Before, I talked about consecutive losses. You're always going to come across consecutive losses as a trader, even if you have a strategy with a relatively high win rate. And that's the fallacy of high win rates. A lot of people think that, oh, if I just have a strategy with high win rates, I won't lose, right? But that's the problem, is that you have high win rates. A lot of times people who have high win rate strategies end up risking a large percentage of their portfolio. And what happens is that once in a while, you're going to come across these strings of losing trades. And what happens is when you risk too much of your portfolio per trade, you come across these strings of losers. You now have blown up such a large hole in your portfolio, it becomes very difficult to come back from, and you're no longer surviving. And you're not thinking about playing the game, you're thinking about winning. And once you think about winning and losing, that's when you've lost sight of the real goal of trading. And that's when you have the highest probability of blowing up your account. Okay, so the win rate fallacy is really the probability, what is the probability of having 7 losing trades in a row if you have a 50% win rate? Now, this is a bit of a thought experiment. And some of you might have preconceived notions as to, what are the chances of having 7 consecutive losing trades if you have a strategy that has a 50% win rate? The answer can have a significant impact on how you view a string of losses, right? A lot of times I'll see people will say, under 1% chance of having 7 consecutive losing trades in a row. It's basically saying, what are the chances of having 7, because you have a 50% win rate, that's basically like a coin toss, right? A heads or tails coin toss. What are your chances of having 7 heads in a row or 7 tails in a row? A lot of people tell me, well, it's under 1%. So the chances of that happening are so low, I'm not too worried about having 7 losing trades in a row. But the reality of it, if you're trading actively, is that in any given year, with a 50% win rate, you have a close to 50% chance that you're going to come across 7 losing trades at some point throughout that year. Meaning if you just flip a coin, because you're trading all year long, you're not just trading 7 trades and stopping, right? If you're just trading 7 trades and you're stopping, yes, the chances of having all 7 trades losing is under 1%. But you're not just making 7 trades and stopping there. You're making perhaps hundreds of trades a year. And when you make hundreds of trades a year and you're flipping a coin every single time, guess what? At some point throughout the year, you're going to have 7 losing trades in a row. So you have a 50-50 shot. You basically have a coin toss shot in 1 year. You're going to come across at least one time of the year where you have 7 losing trades in a row. And the question is, does your risk management strategy allow you to survive that? If it doesn't, then you are very likely, you have a 50% chance that you're not going to be profitable this year because you don't have the proper risk management techniques to survive 7 losing trades in a row. But if you follow this type of golden rule of trading where you never risk more than 1 to 2% of your total account value in trading, and you come across that 7 losing trades in a row, guess what? You're going to survive it and you're going to get past it. And that is how you get yourself onto the path of profitability that most traders, when you think about only wins and losses and you're not thinking about the long term, you fall into that fallacy and you end up in that trap of losing, losing big at some point throughout the year. You lose faith in that strategy. You basically jump ship and you cancel that service. You subscribe to some other service, hoping that some other service won't have 7 losing trades in a row. But somehow, yet sometime down the line, that's going to happen again. You're going to fall into the same pattern over and over again, no matter what strategy you look at, no matter how you use the markets, no matter whether you're using technical or fundamental analysis, what type of options trading you use, you're going to come across this. And if you don't think about this properly, you don't plan for it properly, you're just going to repeat this cycle over and over and over again every single time because you're not focused on surviving the consecutive losses. You keep thinking somehow there's some way, there's some magic strategy that will avoid the 7 losing trades in a row, and as long as I find it, I'll be profitable. But that's the fallacy that most traders fall under. Can you relate to that? Please type 1 into the chat window if you find You keep going from one strategy to the next, and you keep coming across, where you think that it's working. All of a sudden, you have these string of losers, and you say to yourself, this is a terrible strategy. I've lost faith in this. Let me try something else. And, my advice to you is that there's probably nothing wrong with your strategy. There's just the problem is how you're thinking about it and your mindset that somehow some magic profitable strategist is not going to have losing trades in a row. And that's just not going to happen. It's always going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And your role as a trader is to make sure that you survive it, not avoid it. If you're trying to avoid it, then you're going to keep repeating the cycle over and over and over again. But if you think about, hey, how do I survive it when it does come? That is when you're going to start putting yourself onto that path of profitability. Okay, so just to reiterate, successful traders, it's never due to some kind of strategy or indicator that somehow they have access to that you don't. Because if that was the case, then all of you that have spent all this money on different strategies and indicators would be successful already. But that's not what differentiates it. What differentiates successful traders from everyone else is their ability to follow a trading plan and consistently regulate their emotions, especially during a loss. Now, like I said, when you trade small, losses are much easier to deal with and accept and move on from, right? When you trade large, that's when you have that, what poker players call pot committed. You basically have risked so much money that you can't fold. You can't basically accept the fact that you might lose and walk away from the trade. You basically step into it and you hope, and the only thing you have is hope. And occasionally that works, but there's always going to be a time where it doesn't work and you end up blowing up your account. So successful traders, what they're better at doing is not trading. What they're better at doing is following their trading plan and regulating their emotions and know that they're playing the infinite game and they can't deviate from that. Once they deviate from that, that's when they potentially, are going to have behaviors that contribute to losses being larger than they should and wins being smaller than they should. They continuously enter situations where they are risking small wins to hit home runs. And this is something that we'll talk a little bit more next week, which is, once you find yourself in a winning position, a lot of traders that are thinking about trading as wins and losses, what they do is they try to take profits quickly. Many times you take profits prior than what you originally planned on doing. Why do we do this? It's very easy to understand as humans. When we see a win, it's incredibly painful if we see that win turn back into a loss, right? We were right, but because we didn't take profit, it ended up being a loss. That fear causes many of us to take profits earlier than we should. But if you look at the behaviors of successful traders, they do the exact opposite of that. They've trained themselves to kind of face that fear to say, okay, I've got a small win in this trade. What that proves is that my thesis of whatever view I had when I entered this trade is proving to be correct, right? I think the stock's going to go up. It did go up. What do I do in that case? Do I take profits? No. What you do is you can potentially add more to that trade. Basically, you said, hey, I think the stock's going to go up, right? It did go up. So why should I take my profits now? Why don't I add some more and look for it to continue? Because if that trend does continue, that's my ability to turn a small win into a huge home run, even though I'm risking, that this turns around and I end up taking a small loss on the trade. So I basically turn a win back into a loss. And traders realize that that's worth taking on that risk because it gives me that ability to hit home runs, right? I can really hit a home run if a trend really starts to run, and I can only capture that if I continue to hold on to my trade and potentially even add to my trade. Now, the adding to the trade is not always necessary, but it is something it's one of the tactics that successful traders will deploy to turn a small win into a home run, because you need home runs to offset consistent, a string of losing trades. And that's really kind of the mindset that you have to be in terms of being a survivor, meaning you have to take risk when they present themselves, but you want to take the correct risk. You want to take the risks when the market proves that your thesis to be right, You don't want to take additional risks when the market proves you to be wrong, right? And that's when most of us do it, right? We think a stock is going to go up, but because it goes down, we end up adding to that position, thinking that if we just take on more risk, then hopefully it'll come back up and we'll get ourselves back to break even. But at this point, the market has already proven that your thesis is wrong. Why do you throw good money after bad money? Because again, we're human. That's what we do. And what we have to do is we have to change our behaviors and do the exact opposite of what we think we should be doing in order to get ourselves onto the path of profitability. So it's incredibly easy to create a trading plan. And almost everyone here has a trading plan, understands a trading plan. But what's very hard is your ability to stick to it. And that's because we're human. We make counterproductive decisions when we're placed under stress. That's something that's been empirically studied over and over and over again, that human beings make the wrong decisions from a financial perspective when we're placed under stress. So what this course is really about is understanding those behaviors, understanding it's not really about why we do it, but just rather what we do, so that we have even the shot at fixing some of those behaviors and putting ourselves onto the path of profitability. Because if we don't fix those behaviors, if we don't have the right mindset, you're just going to keep repeating the cycle over and over and over again. Does that make sense, everyone? Please type 2 into the chat window if that makes sense to you. So like I said, out of all of this, right, I've sat up here, I've been talking for 45 minutes. The only thing that you really need to do after learning about all of this stuff is this one simple rule. Never exceed more than 1 to 2% of your total account value on any given trade if you are trading options. And one tool that we have built into OptionsPlay that allows you to do that is our risk and investment calculator. Now, many of you may have already used the risk and investment calculator in your portfolio. So I'm just going to show that to you real quick. When you're using the risk and investment calculator on OptionsPlay, no matter what option strategy you are looking at, whether you're looking at a bullish, bearish, long call, debit spread, credit spread, iron condor, straddle, strangle, it doesn't matter. No matter what strategy you are thinking about trading, before you hit that trade button, use the risk and investment calculator that's at the bottom of your widget and click on calculate. Now, I have this already preset, and for those of you that have an OptionsPlay account, I'm sure many of you have already preset your amount, but if you have not done that yet, go to your profile, which is, you can either click on this button here at the bottom, or you can go into the hamburger menu on the upper right-hand corner where your name is. Go into your profile, and there is a risk and investment contract calculator. What this basically allows you to do is put 2 numbers. It defaults at 2%, but allows you to put in your portfolio value. So if, let's say, you have a $150,000 portfolio, you plug that in, it'll default to 2%, and what you do is you save this as default. And what that means is that every single time you look at placing a trade, use the risk and investment calculator, it will automatically calculate how much you can risk to stay within that 1 to 2% rule. And the only thing you have to do is click this calculate button once. Every single time you place this trade, you click that button once, it will calculate automatically for you how many contracts you can purchase. So if I think about buying this put debit spread, it's going to tell me I can buy 19 contracts of it. I don't have to do any math. It just automatically does it for me, where if I lose on this particular trade, my max risk is $2,907, which is just under the $3,000 limit that I've set for myself. And every single trade that I make, even if I'm looking at a trade with unlimited risk, I will still click on the trade button. I will still use the risk and investment calculator and know that I can sell 6 straddles on even though it has unlimited risk. It'll tell me basically if this trade goes, let's say, 2 standard deviations, if the trade goes 2 standard deviations higher, or if the trade goes 2 standard deviations lower, my total loss will not exceed the $3,000 that I've set for myself. So even with strategies with unlimited risk, it'll still try to help you calculate an appropriate number of contracts to trade so that you are doing it properly. Now, how many of you have set this setting in your portfolio already at an OptionsPlay, your risk and investment calculator? Okay. If you have, type yes into the chat window. Okay, I just see a lot of you who have. If you have not, if you said you have not set the setting, go into your profile right now, set it, just type in your portfolio value. You have to do it once. Obviously, if your portfolio value changes significantly, you have to go in there and change that. But set your portfolio value right now, because every single time you place a trade, you should get into the habit of using the risk and investment calculator, click on calculate, and know how many contracts you can buy or sell so that you stick to this 1% to 2% rule. Because out of all of the stuff that we talked about here today, that is the only thing that you have to take away from. That's the only thing you have to implement. Is this 1% to 2% rule. If you implement this 1% to 2% rule, you'll have a much easier chance of actually taking losses when you should be taking losses, because you're risking a small percentage of your portfolio, and you will be able to survive those consecutive losses if you apply this rule each and every single time. Because what you're doing is you're basically saying, I'm not willing to risk losing my business or risking my marriage or blowing up my trading account on every single trade, because I'm going to make sure that I try to survive and continue playing. That's what you're doing when you're sticking to the 1% to 2% rule. And if you don't do it, if you deviate from this, you're basically saying, hey, I'm willing to risk, I'm willing to put my business on the line. I'm willing to put my trading account on the line for this one trade. And if it doesn't go the direction I expect it to, I'm risking going out of business, or I'm risking no longer being a trader. And guess what? I don't believe anyone should be doing that, because if you are doing it, at some point you will go out of business, and at some point you will blow up your trading account, and that you will end up back at square one. And that's what we're trying to prevent. We're trying to move you forward from square one, where many of you feel that you are stuck here today. Okay. So that covers what I wanted to share with you here today. Over the next two sessions, I'm sorry, next one session now, because we've already finished the last two sessions. I apologize. We learned about behavioral biases, and today we learned about risk management, which is really the loss side of things, right? Because we're playing an infinite game, our goal as an infinite game player is to stay in business, or in other words, avoid going out of business. And today we talked about how can we prevent ourselves from going out of business. The 1% to 2% rule is the golden rule. It is simple. There's only one rule. It's black and white. There's no ifs or buts, and it's really easy in theory to implement. What we're going to talk about next week is position sizing. And this is really where, or rather what we're going to be talking about is the winning side. So today we talked about what do you do if the trade's not going in the direction you expect to do. Next week, we're going to talk about what do you do if the trade does go in the direction you expect to do. And that's really where it's much more of an art than it is a science. Today, the loss side, very much a science, very math-based. There's no ifs or buts. When the trade goes in your favor, there are a lot of things that you can do. And there are a lot of things that you can do that contribute to hitting, home runs. And that's what we're going to talk about, are some of those variations and how you can go about doing that. So today we talked about loss side. Next week, we're going to talk about the winning side. Everyone wants to talk about the winning side, and that's really where we should be focusing most of our energy on. You really should be focusing very little time on your losing trades, because if a trade is losing, you should cut it and let it go. And when you trade small, you're going to have a much easier time of letting go. There's no ifs or buts. When a trade goes in your favor, you have a lot of different options that you can now deploy. You can hold on to it, you can add to it, you can scale into it. There are so many different things that you can do. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. Because that is really where you should be focusing your attention on, because that is where you have the opportunity to start outperforming your portfolio. You can't really outperform with losses, right? You can only, the only thing you can do is keep your losses small, so that when the opportunity comes to hit a home run, you take that opportunity. And when you seize that opportunity, that is when you are going to be successful in the long run, because that's how your wins will actually start outweighing your losses. But you have to first keep your losses small to even have the opportunity where your wins are going to outweigh your losses. So it's a two-step process. Today, we talked about how to keep your losses small. Next, we're going to talk about how do you seize the opportunity to hit home runs and get yourself onto that path of profitability. Good afternoon, and welcome back, everyone, to the last session of our January Trading Summit on focusing towards profitability in 2024. We covered a lot over the past few sessions, talking about how our behaviors, specifically around our emotions when we're put under stress, become counterproductive to our goals of being profitable and being successful as traders. With two sides of the equation, the loss side and the win side. In both instances, many times what we do is we deviate from our trading plan that causes us to have gains that are smaller than we expect them to and have losses that are larger than we expected to. And last week we covered the loss side substantially around how to prevent the loss side getting out of control, how to get a handle on your emotions so that you keep your losses small. Because if you don't keep your losses small, no matter what happens, you will not have a shot at of those gains. So the first goal of reaching profitability is to make sure that you keep your losses small and that you don't blow up your account so that you have at least the opportunity to be in the markets when you capture a trend and potentially hit a home run and have your gains be larger than your losses. And today, what we're going to focus our attention on is the winning side. What happens when you do get a view on the markets correctly, when you do have a stock that you particularly like, where the market confirms that, how do you turn that win into home runs that can offset the losses that you have in your portfolio and set yourself onto the path towards profitability? So a lot we're going to cover here today. For those of you that are brand new to here to OptionsPlay, just remember these Thursday education sessions. Every Thursday, we are here to help empower you to trade sustainably and confidently through these OptionsPlay education sessions. And our goal here is always to make sure that you have a well-rounded education that's designed around helping you grow your trading account in the long run. Now, before we get started, what we are going to discuss here today is purely for education and demonstration purposes. It is not a solicitation or recommendation to buy or sell any of the specific securities that I'll be using as example purposes during today's session. So we're going to start off by just reviewing what our summit goals are. And then what we're going to do is we're going to recap what we've learned over the past two sessions, specifically on profitability. We're going to talk about what emotions you're going to need to manage in order to get yourself onto the path of profitability. And we'll talk a little bit about adjusting strategies and types, specifically around when you have a winning trade, what do you do with that winning trade? What adjustments can you make to that winning trade that gives you the opportunity to have your wins be larger than your losses and not have your wins be actually smaller than what you anticipate them to be? That's really what holds most traders back. Losses being larger than they should, that's what we tackled last week. And this week, wins being smaller than they should, we're going to tackle that and what strategies that you have in place that can help you adjust your winners so that you can turn them into what are larger winners or home runs to offset your hopefully smaller losses and the combination of those two things together is what puts you onto the path towards profitability. We'll talk a little bit about the path to consistency before we wrap this up and open this up for Q&A here at the very end. But the primary thing that I want you to be able to walk away from today's session is a clear understanding as to what are the techniques of position sizing that can lead to profitability. So the common question that I get on all of these sessions is, are these sessions recorded and can I get access to the slides? And the short answer to your question is yes. You just need to either have a free trial to OptionsPlay or become a member here at OptionsPlay. And you can sign up for your free trial by simply clicking on the link that Philip just shared with us so graciously in the chat window, or you can point your phone to that QR code on your screen. It takes literally 10 seconds to sign up for a free 30-day trial. It will give you access to the full platform, all of the services that we offer, including when we send out the recording and slides to all of our members this weekend, you will receive it. You'll receive it for this week, and you will also receive the recording for the previous week so you can catch up and make sure you review the entire summit and everything that we've learned, first session, second session, and today's session, and making sure that you have what it takes. You have that well-rounded education that puts you onto the path towards profitability. So just to reiterate, my goal here for this entire trading summit is to empower you to empower you to grow your trading account and become a profitable trader. And that comes down to two things: confidence and consistency. Now, I've gone over this over the past couple of weeks, so I'm not going to reiterate it again. You can go back to the previous recordings to get a better understanding as to what confidence and consistency means in this particular case. But just to recap some of the things that we've gone over the past couple of weeks. The first thing is that reaching profitability conceptually is incredibly easy. You just need to have your total wins outpace your total losses. It's basic arithmetic. However, what we've learned is that our emotions cause us to make counterproductive trading decisions. And it all comes down to really one thing, which is avoiding the pain that's required to take a loss and to hold on to a winning trade. And when you combine those two things together, the human desire to avoid taking pain and kicking things down the road, what happens is that our losses end up being larger than we anticipate them to be, and our wins ends up being smaller than we anticipate them to be. And the combination of those two things causes us to underperform and not reach that level of profitability that we're looking for. So there's two sides of the equation that we need to tackle in order to solve this. First of all, you need to avoid large losses in your portfolio. We all have an unlimited desire in terms of how much gains we want, but we have limited capital, limited resources to deploy in order to achieve the upside that we're looking for. So the number one goal as a trader, as we talked about last week, the concept of finite versus infinite games, is to make sure that you stay in the game. And the only way to do that is to make sure you don't blow up your portfolio. Once you blow up your portfolio, any opportunity to hit it out of the park, any opportunity that you see in the markets you can't take because you've blown up your account. So first and foremost, protect your capital. Last week, we talked about what strategies you can do to protect your capital, and arguably they are some of the easiest rules to implement of the things you're going to learn during this trading summit. They're very straightforward, they're black and white, they're rooted in mathematics, and there's no ifs or buts as to what to do in order to keep your losses small in your portfolio. Now, on the flip side, when you do have a winning trade, what can you do with that winning trade? This is really where there are a lot more things that you can do, which is why that's where you should be focusing your attention on. Now, when I work with traders, and I've been doing this for 18 years as a market strategist, working with retail traders, institutional traders, thousands of them, the one thing that I noticed, the pattern that I noticed with traders that struggle with profitability, is that they focus almost all of their attention on their losing positions. They sweat over their losing positions. They stress over their losing positions. They're constantly asking me, what can I do about this losing position? How do I turn it back into a winner? And they give very little thought to their winning positions. The winning positions are the ones that they give the least amount of attention to, and they actually end up taking profits many times too early on those winning positions. And they focus 80% of their energy on their losing positions. And if you can relate to that, please type one into the chat window. If you find yourself kind of constantly looking at your losing positions, thinking about what you can do about them, asking people, how do I adjust this? How do I fix this? How do I do something to turn my losers back into winners? Somehow, if you are able to do that, you'll be profitable. This is the one thing that I noticed that's different between profitable traders and traders that struggle with trading. Profitable traders, they don't think about their losers because, like I said, the rules are black and white. They're simple. They're rooted in mathematics. There's no even though there are emotions tied to a loss, there shouldn't be a lot of emotion. There shouldn't be a lot of wiggle room as to what you do with a losing trade. It's very straightforward as to what you do. You have to cut those losers and you have to do them ruthlessly. There's not much thought that needs to go into it. However, once a trade is a winning trade, no matter how small that winning trade, you have a lot more opportunity to adjust that trade, do something to that trade where you can turn that small win into a much larger win, into those home runs. And that's where you should be focusing 80% of your energy on. Your losers should be taking the least amount of your time. You should be focusing on your winners. And this is what we're going to spend some time talking about here today. So let's talk a little bit about the emotions that you're gonna have to face as you manage your profits and as you manage your winners. So First of all, we never want to risk more than 2% of your total capital per trade, because the one thing we learned last week is that consecutive losses, meaning where you have 5, 6, 7 losing trades in a row, happen far more frequently than traders anticipate them to happen or think that they're going to happen. And what happens is that if you're risking more than 2% of your account per trade, the chances of you blowing up your account are substantially higher than you think they're going to be. So as a rule, as a trader, your goal is not to prevent having consecutive losses. I find a lot of traders think that somehow, they just have the wrong strategy, that somehow if they just have the right strategy, these strategies won't have consecutive losses. That's not how it works. Some of the best strategies in the world but constantly go through periods of time when the strategy doesn't work. It's not the strategy, it's how you trade the strategy that determines whether you're successful or not. Successful traders, they focus their attention not on preventing consecutive losses. Their focus is on surviving consecutive losses so that they can survive another day to continue trading after those consecutive losses. It's the traders that struggle with trading. They blame the strategy and not their position sizing. And that's why you end up in this vicious cycle over and over again, where you go from one strategy, you lose some money in that strategy, you go to the next strategy, and at some point you lose money in that strategy as well, and you move on to the next strategy. You just go from one strategy to the next, to the next, to the next, and you never find a strategy that works, because there's no strategy that doesn't have consecutive losses. And when you think that somehow you're just missing out on that secret strategy, then unfortunately you just end up in this vicious cycle over and over and over again. And if you can relate to that, please type 2 into the chat window if you can relate to that. And again, the difference between successful traders and everyone else is that they're not focused on preventing consecutive losses. They're focused on surviving them. And they do it by making sure they allocate a small percentage of their portfolio per trade. So when that string of losses inevitably happens, it hurts, but it doesn't destroy them from being able to continue. Now, that part is, like I said, emotionally is going to be difficult to manage losses, but is actually should be the easiest part of all of this, because the rules are black and white. It's very straightforward. It's a simple rule as far as never allocating more than a certain percentage of your account per trade, okay? But when it comes to the other side of the equation, adjusting small winners to potentially hit home runs, doesn't that sound nice, right? You have a small win. Instead of just taking that small win, how do you turn that small win into a huge win? This is really where you have to face something that for a lot of traders is incredibly uncomfortable and incredibly painful, which is the fact that when a trade works in your favor, you do the exact opposite of what your body is telling you to do. Your body is telling you take that profit, right? Because if you don't take that profit, what happens if the market turns back around and you end up losing on that trade? That hurts even more, right? Because you had an opportunity to take your profits, you didn't do it, and now those profits are evaporated and you've lost money on the trade. And many times, why do we take profits early? We take profits early because we want to avoid that potential, right? Because that potential of having a win turned back into a loss hurts more than just a straight up loss, right? Because here you had an opportunity to take a win, but you didn't take it. But in reality, when you look at traders that are successful, they don't take that profit when they have a small win, because what happens with a small win is that the market is starting to show you that your thesis or your view on the market is proving out to be correct, right? You thought a trend was going to start. Well, guess what? There are some early signs that you were right. What do you do when you are right? Instead of taking exposure off the table, you should be adding exposure. You should basically say, oh, it's kind of like drilling for oil, right? You drill a well, you hit something interesting. What do? You don't take that oil. You don't say, okay, I'm done drilling oil for it. What do? You try to drill more holes around it, and you try to see if you can get more exposure and turn it into a big win, right? Same thing with trading. If the market proves that you're right, what you try to do is you try to add exposure. And this is what we're going to talk about here a little bit more today from a mechanics perspective. How do you actually go about doing that? And this requires facing the extreme uncomfortable, because everything in your body is telling you to do the exact opposite of that. Everything in your body is telling you, hey, the market proved you to be right. Take those profits, otherwise you could lose them. But instead, successful traders, they face the uncomfortable and they basically say, I've been proven right. let's see if this turns into something bigger. Let me add some more exposure. And this does risk that you turn a small win into a loss again. But if you don't take those opportunities, you will never have the opportunity to take a small win and turn it into a home run. And when you do hit a home run, you're going to offset a very large consecutive losing trades in a row when you do eventually hit one of those home runs. You're not going to hit home runs all the time, but you have to put yourself into a position to at least attempt to hit home runs. Otherwise, you're never going to be a profitable trader. Does that make sense, everyone? Please type 3 into the chat window if that makes sense to you. So you must keep your losses small, and you must consistently put yourself into opportunities where you can hit a home run. And where do you have the best shot of hitting a home run? When you have a small win that's starting to play out. You had a view that you thought was going to play out. It ends up starting to play out. Well, now is the opportunity to add more exposure, see if it does continue. And that is where you have the best opportunity to do that. And it's incredibly uncomfortable to do that. But if you don't do that, you're never going to hit those home runs, and your wins are going to be small, and they're never going to be able to offset the losses that you have. Okay? Like I said, basic arithmetic, but incredibly difficult from an emotional perspective to get over the hump, even though conceptually very easy to understand. So I'll come back here to the daily play process. Let's talk first about the adjusting winners, right? Because like I said, this side of the equation where you should really be spending 80% of your energy on is you're adjusting your winners. This is very much an art and not a science. The loss side, cutting losses, making sure that you never risk 2% of more than 2% of your total account value, that's science. That's math, that's black and white. So that's why it should only take up 20% of your energy. There's nothing that you need to learn or figure out. It's black and white. You either you follow the rules or you're not following the rules. But when a trade is going in your favor, there are a lot of variations of what you can do. And this is an art and not a science. And that's why 80% of your time should be focused on this side of the equation, even though most of us end up spending 80% of the time on the other side of the equation where it's very black and white. There's really not much for you to do. So as the market confirms your outlook to be correct, that's where you have the opportunity to add exposure, right? So you think a stock that has bottomed is starting to turn back around. Now that it's started to turn back around, instead of taking profits here and saying, oh, okay, I'm right, now is an opportunity for you to say, well, is this trend going to continue now? Does it have the opportunity to continue going higher? We've all seen charts where someone shows you an indicator where it turned, and once it turned, it took off, and they show you this huge chart, right? But the question is, are you capturing that whole trend? Chances are, if you're using an indicator to buy or to sell, chances are you aren't capturing that trend, because by the time that indicator has reached probably here, it's already telling you to sell, right? But keep in mind that if you're hoping to look for a big trend, you have to try to ride that trend. You have to put yourself into the position to ride that trend. The only way to do that is to stay in the trade, and not only stay in the trade, but potentially add to that trade, right? Market has proven you to be right. Here's an opportunity for you to add exposure and potentially hit that home run. So this comes with the risk that, so once the trade starts to turn around and you start to add some exposure, that the stock then drops back, right? There's that risk. Well, here's the thing, is that once you add that exposure, because you have some profits, those profits will help dampen some of the losses if it does turn back. And what this means is that you can still potentially get out at the same small loss as you were originally going to get out if this trade did not go in the direction that you expected to. So this is an opportunity where you can put yourself in the position to hit home runs without necessarily adding either any additional exposure to your portfolio or not much additional exposure. So maybe you go from risking 2% to maybe 3% of your entire portfolio, but you're not going from risking 2% to necessarily 4 or 5% of your account by adding exposure, because you have some profits from that initial trade that can help buffer some of the losses if it does turn back into a loser. Now, when you add to a winning position, sometimes as many as 50% of the time, it just turns back into a small loss. And that's okay, because a small loss is going to be relatively easy to overcome, or even consecutive small losses are easy to overcome when the scenario does arise that you add exposure to the position and the stock does start to take off. It only takes one or two of these positions to take off before you're able to offset a very large number of small losing trades in a row, presuming that you kept your losses small. Does that make sense, everyone? Please type 4 into the chat window if that makes sense to you. Perfect. So let's talk a little bit about when to adjust and how to adjust. So you've placed a trade, the trade is going in the direction you expect it to. What are opportunities to actually trigger this adjustment? Meaning, when do you actually think about adding to this position? And these are just examples. These are not by any means an exhaustive list, but these are common scenarios that you'll come across where it might make sense to add to a position. So first of all, when a stock breaks out or breaks down from a major support or resistance level. So if you're bullish on a stock and the stock now breaks above, let's say, a double top or some kind of resistance level, it's proven it to break out now, because once a stock breaks out, it has the opportunity to run significantly higher. That's an opportunity to start adding to that position, because your view that this stock is bullish is starting to be confirmed by the market. And when you get confirmation, that is an opportunity to add to that position and see if that stock does continue and really take off. And once you're able to do that, now you have an initial core position and you have a secondary position that can really help boost your profits if it does continue going in your favor. And vice versa, if you have a bearish view, if it breaks below some major support level, that can be an opportunity to start adding to a bearish position. A trend change. So basically, you think that the trend is going to go from bullish to bearish or bearish to bullish. Any type of sufficient evidence that helps you confirm that the trend has changed. So for example, if let's say a stock is declining and you feel that it's gotten to a point where it's a bottom and you're saying, let me take a small position and I'm going to call it a bottom and see if it's going to turn around. Let's say this market starts to turn around. Maybe at this point, the momentum indicators have started to turn positive, meaning before it was negative and now it's positive. So you're getting confirmation not only from price action, but also from momentum that things have shifted in the opposite direction. That's an opportunity to start adding to that position, right? You thought it's going to turn around. It has turned around. Now's an opportunity for you to add to that position. Doesn't always work out. Sometimes there could just be a bit of a small rally and the market continues back in the direction that it continues on. You just have to make sure you manage your stop losses correctly. You have to manage your losers. So just because you're adding to a position, you need to be even more diligent on your losing side. So if the trade does end up going back in the opposite direction you expect it to, make sure that you're able to cut your losses at a reasonable place so that you still risk a relatively small percentage of your portfolio. And like I said, because you have some gains from that initial trade, that's going to help buffer some of the losses. So you can actually keep the losses on the bigger position to roughly the same size as your original smaller position, because you have the gains from the winning position to offset the losses from the second position that you're adding to it. So this way, you basically put yourself into a position where you could hit a home run while not necessarily adding on either any risk at all, or maybe just adding a relatively minor amount of risk in order to hit that home run. And that's where you want to keep putting yourself in that position over and over and over again. You never know where the markets are going to go. You can't tell where the market's going to go. The only way to be profitable is if you consistently put yourself in that position over and over and over again. And again, you can only do that if you don't blow up your account. So first and foremost, don't blow up your account, trade small, keep your losses small. And when the opportunity arises where the view that you have is proven to be correct, that's where you add to that position and you consistently put yourself back into a position where you can add a little bit more risk, but try to hit that home run. Does that make sense? Please type 5 into the chat window if that makes sense to you. And lastly, pullbacks and rallies. So you think that the stock is moving higher, right? Stocks that move higher don't just move in a straight line higher. They move higher and they have pullbacks. They move higher and they have pullbacks. So pullbacks are also another opportunity to add further exposure, because basically what you're doing is you're optimizing for that continuation higher. And there are many ways that you can do that. I think the most common way is to use momentum indicators to, maybe using a shorter period momentum indicator to give you a sense for when there's a short-term pullback. But those are opportunities to add to your winning position. So a trade, you think the stock is moving higher, it starts to move higher, but maybe it starts to consolidate and pull back a little. That's your opportunity to add some exposure. Like I said, the idea is to add exposure without adding a lot more risk, because you have some gains to offset the additional exposure that you're getting into. But you still have to keep managing your risk correctly, because now you have doubled the exposure. You have to manage your risk actually even a little bit more actively, because you have double the exposure in the stock. But because you have that double exposure in the stock, if it does continue moving higher, even a win in that situation will largely offset 4 or 5 losing trades in a row from that one winning trade that you have. And that's what you want to consistently keep putting yourself into that position. Now that we talked about kind of when you might want to make that adjustments, let's talk about what type of adjustments do you want to make. I'll show you a few different variations, but arguably, I always say, especially if this is your first time learning this and this is your first time hearing this, keep things really, really simple. So that would be either a fixed percent or a fixed dollar amount each time that you make that adjustment. So for example, if you're risking 2% of your account per trade, when the market proves your view to be correct and you're thinking about adding exposure, add another 2%, right? Each time you add the same percentage of your total portfolio value to that trade. Keeps things really simple, keeps the math relatively easy to keep up with. Or you can do it based on dollar amounts. You can do either percentage or dollar amounts. These arguably end up being the same, perhaps just a different way for you to think about it, so, in either in dollar terms or percentage terms. But this is really where I think that if this is your first time learning about this, stick to one of these two, either fixed percentage or fixed dollar amount. So every time you think about adding exposure, you're adding the same amount in a linear fashion. And for those of you that have some experience doing this, you might consider pyramiding. And this is either adding exposure in increasing or decreasing size. So for example, if let's say you started that position with 2%, as you want to add exposure, maybe the next size up, you want to do 3%, next size up, you do 4%, or vice versa. You start at 2, you move up to 1.5%, and then 1%, and then 0.5%, which is probably more common. As the trade goes in your favor, as you add exposure, you're adding less and less additional exposure. This way, you're not potentially risking a small reversal wiping out all of your gains. But like I said, this is really where it's more of an art than a science. But if you're doing this for the first time, keep things simple. Another system is the martingale system. This is one that has a lot of traders doing a lot of research on it. If you just Google martingale trading systems, there are libraries of text that have been written on the martingale system and variations of the martingale system to try to basically take this concept that I'm showing you to a level that can reach profitability. And there's some fallacies with the martingale system, but effectively the rule of thumb is to basically double your size after each win or loss. So as the trade goes in your favor, maybe the next trade that you make, you trade double the size. I'm not a big fan of the martingale system. There are huge risks with the martingale system. So it's certainly the deep end of the pool if you're going to dive into that. But for some of you, you've been learning about this from me for years. This is not new to you. You're looking for new variations, perhaps looking to things like that, or some kind of adjusted martingale system could maybe be useful for you. Another one is volatility based, basically adjusting your position based on the underlying volatility. So if let's say the trade is going in the direction you expect it to, but volatility is actually lower than when you initially entered the position, maybe you could trade a little larger size, or maybe volatility is larger than when you initially entered, then you trade a little smaller size. So you're basically adjusting your position sizing based on the volatility of the underlying stock. And lastly, you can do a combination of any of the variations from and of the ones that I've said. And like I said, the five that I've given you in terms of this list is not an exhaustive list. It's one of a few lists, one of rather some of the more popular ways that people will adjust a winning position. But you can use a combination of these in conjunction with each other. And again, this is really why it's an art and not a science. And this is why this is where you spend 80% of your time learning, optimizing, seeing what works for you. And when I say what works for you, I mean from an emotional perspective. What can you handle from an emotional perspective where you say, this is uncomfortable, but this is something that I can deal with, right? Martingale systems, probably out of the realm for 95% of you, right? But fixed dollar amount, fixed percentages, that's something that most of you, even though it's uncomfortable, you can probably wrap your head around. You can probably get your mind to think in those terms and accept that as, okay, here's a way for me to potentially outperform my portfolio or outperform the market that I haven't been able to reach that up until now. And I know most of you watching here today have probably struggled reaching profitability and are currently figuring out how to go about doing so. And I know, especially since we're just starting out this year, a lot of you may have New Year's resolutions to kind of take more on in terms of education, to learn more about the markets, learn more about trading, learn more about technical analysis and options trading. And I keep going back to traders that I've been working with for the past 18 years. Those are all important elements of trading. You can't trade without having a basic understanding of markets, right? You need to have that underlying foundational education in order to trade markets. But I tend to find that most traders spend 100% of their education and resources and time learning about technical analysis, learning about options trading, learning about indicators and trading systems, and they spend zero amount of time on this stuff. But this is the stuff that makes the difference between successful traders and everyone else. Successful traders, it's not like they have some secret technical indicator that you don't have access to, and that's why you're not successful. Successful traders are ones because they have spent the time to deal with how emotionally uncomfortable it is to take losses when they feel that, hey, if I just hold on to it, maybe I can get back to break even, because that's the process that opens you up for bigger losses. And when you have a winning trade, it's very uncomfortable to hold on to it and add exposure. But the ones that have taken the time to face that and understand why that's so important and contributes to their outperformance and works on that every single day, those are the traders that are successful. So if you want a shot at putting yourself onto the path of profitability in 2024, you have to take aside real time and go through what I've taught you here today and try to internalize it. It's easy to understand the words of what I'm telling you. It's incredibly difficult to actually internalize it, even for a week, let alone for a month or a year, right? So you have to start somewhere. You have to start one day at a time, and you have to think, and you have to kind of almost recalibrate your brain every single day as you face the markets, as you open up your account, you look at the P&L of every single position. You have to take time out and recalibrate your brain, especially the first few months of doing this. Every single time you look at that loss, you have to remind yourself, I have to emotionally detach myself from this. The rules are very simple. I have to keep my losses small. If I don't keep my losses small, I have no shot at being at even putting myself into the position of winning big. And when I have that opportunity to win big, what do I do? Do I do what's comfortable by taking small profits, or do I face the uncomfortable and say, here's my opportunity, and do I seize that opportunity? That is what is going to differentiate those of you that are watching here today at the end of the year, who is successful and who is not, who is willing to put in that work and think about, what does it take? What do I need to work on? Because the technical analysis and options trading are important, but it's not what you need to focus your attention on working on if you want to be a successful trader and profitable trader. So putting yourself onto the path of growing consistently, you have to balance out your education. You can't just all be technical analysis and indicators and options trading. Stuff is important, but if you don't focus on this type of stuff and balance out your education, you're going to consistently struggle year after year, and you're never going to put yourself onto the path of profitability. You have to understand your emotions of these strategies. And that's the incredibly difficult part. You have to face the uncomfortable. You have to do some introspection in order to get to the other side of this. And that simply takes time to reflect on your feelings and your behaviors. Writing in a journal helps. Meditation helps. These are all things that help you realize what you're feeling and how your emotions affect, or rather, what behaviors you have as a result of how you're feeling. A lot of times our behaviors, they're almost subconscious at this point, right? They're hardwired in us. And it takes time to kind of take a step back and realize I'm taking profits early because I feel this way. I'm holding on to losses longer than I should because I feel this way. And only when you're able to do that work, the next time you feel that way, do you have that opportunity of saying, okay, I feel a certain way. This is what my body's telling me to do, but I know I should be doing something different. And that's just not something that happens overnight. For some of you, that'll become a little easier than others, but there are ways that you can get past that: journaling, meditation. And these might sound foo-foo for a trader, right? You might just be thinking to yourself, I just haven't spent enough money to buy that secret indicator that this guy's selling for $5,000. If I just did that, I'll be profitable. It's not that. I promise you, I've been doing this for 18 years. If it was that, every single person who shelled out $5,000 would be successful in their trader. And there are thousands of you that have shelled out way more than $5,000 for indicators and education and services and subscriptions and have not reached that profitability. Why is that the case? Because the stuff that is required to help you reach profitability is not something that you can purchase with money. It's stuff that you have to take the time out and really work on yourself in order to put yourself onto that path of profitability. Does that make sense, everyone? Please type 6 into the chat window if that makes sense to you. So just to reiterate, putting yourself onto the path of achieving this growth, taking that time out to do some self-reflection, the next time you hold on to a loss longer than you should, or take profits early, at the end of the day, take a step back and say to yourself, what was I feeling in that moment when I did something that I shouldn't have done? And then it's going to take a lot more time. It might take you 5, 10, 30 times for that to happen before you can really identify how you were feeling when you did something. But you have to do it, because if you don't do it, you're not going to be able to fix that problem, because you have to be able to identify that feeling first before you're able to fix the behavior that is associated with that feeling. And usually that feeling is, I don't want to deal with this pain, or I don't want to deal with future pain. So here's what I'm going to do to prevent myself from feeling pain either now or in the future. And the avoidance of pain is really what largely contributes to our inability to stick to our trading plan. So that's what I covered. That's what I wanted to share with you here today. We learned a lot over these 3 trading sessions. We learned about the behaviors. We learned about how to keep our losses small so that we even have the opportunity to hit home runs. And today we talked about, when we have that opportunity to hit a home run, how do we seize that opportunity, okay? And you really have to take into account all 3 things if you want to put yourself onto the path of profitability. So we went over a lot today. We went over a lot over the past few weeks. So if you want to access to the recording of the entire series along with the slides, this is what I encourage you to spend some time over the next few weeks to really hunker down and learn these things, right? I host these sessions at least once every few months because of how important it is to your ability to succeed as a trader. And some of you might have listened to this a few times. Some of you might have listened to this a dozen times, for those of you that have been long-term members. And most of them will tell you it requires a constant reminder of this stuff in order to do, because if you don't constantly remind yourself of this stuff, you kind of naturally revert back to your old subconscious self. It's stuff that takes consistent and work in order to get yourself onto that path of profitability. So it's incredibly important that for those of you that are new to this, for those of you that are on this journey, that you take the time to go through the recordings, go through the slides. Like I said, it's available to everyone who either is a member here at OptionsPlay, or if you just have a free trial and you can start that a 30-day trial by clicking on the link that Philip will share in the chat window, or you can point your phone to that QR code on your screen, and we'll take about 10 seconds to sign yourself up for that free 30-day trial. And when we send out the recording and the slides to our members this weekend, you will receive it as well. So that covers what I wanted to share with you here today. I hope that this was illuminating for those of you that are new to options trading, new to trading, or even for those of you that have been trading for years but have still failed to reach that point where you feel that you can confidently grow your account. I hope that this helps you understand what it takes to put yourself onto that path of profitability. And if you were thinking to yourself at the beginning of this year, this is the year that I'm going to spend more time learning, technical analysis or options trading, or subscribe to that one service that I wasn't sure if I was going to subscribe to, or buy that $5,000 indicator. Trust me, before you go and embark on those things, which those things may very much be a contributing factor to your success or how successful you are in the future, this is what it takes to first get yourself onto the path of profitability. If you don't put yourself onto the path of profitability, all of those tools, all of those education, unfortunately, is not going to get you there. You have to first put yourself onto that path of profitability, and then those are tools that can help increase your path, or rather make your path perhaps smoother, less bumpy in one way or another. But without this specific tool, the chances of being successful as a trader is virtually zero in my experience of doing this for the past 18 years. So with that, what I'll do is I'll open this up for Q&A. I only have a few minutes, but I want to try to answer as many questions as I have time for. So there's a Q&A window at the bottom of your screen. If you could please type your questions into the Q&A window, I will answer as many questions as I have time for before I have to run. Okay, here I have a couple of questions from Nestor. He's asking, when I'm adding to a winner, would you add the same exact trade or just something similar? If you have a bull call spread and you're great question. So his question is basically, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but his question is, if I bought a call option on a stock that went higher, when I add to that position, should I be adding another call option, or can I trade another trade structure like a vertical spread, a debit spread, a credit spread, something else? And the answer to your question, Nestor, is that, like I said, this is an art, not a science. You can do any of those things. I tend to find that when you're starting out your first time, keep things simple. Add a fixed amount, add the same strategy. Don't change things up a little. Don't change too many things up. Keep things simple, right? Because if you have a call option here and now you're managing a credit spread, now you have two sets of rules. We have one set of rule on how to manage long calls and another set for managing credit spreads. Now you have to keep track of two sets of rules for one position and when you want to deal with that. I think that adds complexity that you don't need when you're first starting out. Keep things simple. Add another call option because the two rules are the same. And as you get more experience in these things, can you change the strategy? Absolutely. We do that from time to time. For those of you that follow us on the daily play, that's part of our process. We generally add the same strategy to keep things simple. Occasionally, we change up the strategy when we feel that it makes sense. But I think that the best starting point for most users is to add the same strategy when you're adding to it. Nestor, your question about, how do you know which winners to add to? I talked about that a little bit as far as when a winner may justify, when you might want to consider adding to a winning position. We did go over that. I don't agree with adding exposure. Things can go south very hard and very fast. Isn't it better to roll the position? So here's the thing, right? If, let's say, you have a position that's going in the direction let's say you started the initial position here, right? And the stock goes up a little bit. It hasn't reached your take profit level yet, but it's got some profits, and you add exposure to it. The thing is that if the stock reverses lower, right, you have the losses of this added position, but if you look at the original position, you're back to your original break even. So even though you've experienced a loss, right, the loss is actually equal to the original position, even though you have double the exposure. That's the goal of these types of positions, is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to put yourself into the position of potentially hitting a home run with double the original position. Yet, if it turns back to original starting point, you're not risking any additional capital. You might end up adding a little bit more risk, right? But you're not doubling your risk. Because what you're saying is that if the stock reverses lower, I'm going to get myself out where I'm still going to risk 2%. I'm not risking more than that. But if the trade does go in my favor, now I can really hit a home run, right? So that's why you wait until you are winning before you add exposure. I agree with you that if you add exposure when you're losing, that's when things can go south very fast. And that's how most traders blow up their accounts, because most traders don't add to winning positions. Most traders, they initiate a position hoping that the stock's going to go higher, but instead the stock goes lower. What do? You add further exposure, hoping that if it goes back in your favor, you'll be able to get yourself back to break even. So I would say in my 18 years of doing this, probably 90% of the time that people quote unquote add exposure, they're doing it when they have a loss. And that is the worst time to add exposure, because that's when things can go fast. They can go south very hard and fast. But when you add exposure to a winning position, it has to reverse quite a bit before things go wrong, go south hard and fast. That's why you only add exposure on winning trades and not losing trades, which is very counterintuitive. 90% of the time I see people adding exposure, they're adding exposure to a losing trade, and that's how things go south very quickly. Hopefully that answered your question, and hopefully a lot of other viewers here was wondering the same thing. What's your typical ideal starting position? 25 or 30%? No, Tony. Like we covered last week, 2%. Never go above 2%. If you're going above 2% on any initial position, trust me, you will find yourself in trouble at some point throughout the trading year. And as a trader, if you blow up your account at any point out of the year, guess what? You will never, ever put yourself back into the opportunity of hitting home runs because you've blown up your account. You must survive your consecutive losses. If you don't survive them, you're never going to be successful. When you're down in a position, let's say 40% down in the debit spread, if you go back in the green, you should get out a smaller percentage gain since you were down a significant amount. So Nestor's basically saying, what if you're down in a position, it doesn't reach your stop loss level, and then it turns back green? I guess the question is as to how much it turned back green, right? And again, I don't think you should base it on percentage of whether you've gained or lost in the trade. You should be basing it on the underlying, right? Because your thesis of why you got into the trade is not based on a percentage of the option premium. You got into the trade based on the underlying position. And the question is whether the underlying position is proving your initial thesis to be correct or not, right? You should only add to a position if something confirms your initial thesis to be correct and shows you that there's now an opportunity that this could turn into a much larger trend. So from my perspective, I don't think percentages is really what you would use to make that decision. Someone's asking for examples on this. I would say that if you follow our daily play trading signals, that is the best place where we give you examples of adding exposure. We add exposure all the time. The most recent trade that we added exposure to was Oracle. We had a bullish trade in Oracle, started working in our favor. We added more exposure to it. And we're basically looking for that to continue higher. That's the best place where you can see real examples that you can follow along of when things don't go in the direction you expected and you want to cut losses, and when things go in your favor and you want to continue that. When an indicator like Ichimoku Close or MACD show that a winning trade is running out of momentum, another way of taking advantage of the trade is to sell either covered call or work at a credit spread that's profitable if the stock pulls back for a while. Bob, that certainly is another variation to this. I would say that, you're not in that particular example, you're not trying to hit a home run. You're just trying to buy yourself some more time, right? By selling some premium. That makes sense. Uh, that makes a lot of sense. More so for a stock position, less so for an options position, because options obviously are approaching expiration. But absolutely, Bob, this the number of variations of what I'm talking about is infinite, right? So what you're talking about is a specific scenario that you're coming across where you feel it's an opportunity for me to make an adjustment and do something about it that can better my outcome than if I don't make that adjustment. And it sounds like, from my perspective, Bob, you've been a member for a long time. You've obviously learned a lot from us, and now you're applying what you've learned to your trading, and I commend you for that. And because what you're saying, it makes a lot of sense. That is specifically to the scenario that you're coming across. You have to think about the scenario and think about what adjustments make sense. And it sounds like, from your perspective, if you have a bullish trend that you think is going to pause, selling that cover call, selling that credit spread makes a lot of sense. I'll comment on positions in our daily play position in our newsletter tomorrow morning. I'm not going to comment on them right now just because I haven't had a chance to take a look at Amazon and Apple earnings after hours before I started this call. Is there a threshold that when you add, how much? So there is no hard and fast rule as to when you add and how much you add. That's kind of my point, is that it's very much an art versus a science. I tend to find that you want to see, on a call or a debit spread, at least 50% gains before you think about adding it. But like I said, it should be based on more of the underlying than it is on the options position. It should be underlying. The stock itself has to be telling you, hey, whatever thesis that I originally had is starting to play out. There's some signs that what I thought was going to happen is actually happening, and this is my opportunity to seize the moment and turn what could be a small win into a large win. You have to have that underlying prove you to be correct. Any suggestions on our seminar regulars who might appreciate applying asset allocation principles to a portfolio of option trades? So, Bob, we apply the same principles that we taught you here during this session, day in and day out, in the Daily Play newsletter that we send out. We send out trading signals, but arguably, in my opinion, the trading signals themselves are not the important part. How we apply these position and portfolio management rules to each one of those positions each and every day is what you're going to find more valuable. These are real trades that you can follow along, where we are not only telling you what we're trading, but what size we're trading, when we're cutting losses, why we're cutting losses, when we're adding to a position, how we're adding to that position, why we're adding to that position. That's really where you can learn a lot from us, because what's one thing to see and hear what I'm telling you here today, it's another thing to see us actually applying it. And as a member and as a free trial, you get our Daily Play newsletter, which sends trading signals out to you. But like I said, it's not just the signals, it's how we apply those signals in terms of position sizing and how we manage our losses and how we manage those gains that is going to be most valuable to you to put you onto that path of profitability. Is there any cap on adding exposure? When do you stop? So great question. Meaning, if a trade goes in your favor, right? Like, when do you consider stopping to add exposure? In my opinion, the best the point at which you say I'm no longer going to add bullish exposure to a stock that you're bullish on is at the moment that you're bearish on the stock. So, as long as you're bullish on the stock, you can keep adding exposure. But once you turn bearish on the stock, so whatever, indicator that turns you bullish on the stock, you basically are looking for the opposite signal that has now turned that view from bullish to bearish. So whatever criteria you had used that said that a bearish trend has now turned bullish, use that same criteria to say, is this bullish trend turning back into bearish? If that's the case, you no longer add exposure, you take all of your exposure off the table, and you are done with the trade. Hopefully that answered your question. Hopefully that's a good way to wrap up today's session. With that, thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. I really hope that this gives you something to take away from to help kick you off 2024 in the right manner. I hope this is enlightened for those of you that are not familiar with this before starting today's session, that this is an element of your options education, of your trading education that's required in order to put yourself onto your path of profitability. And this takes time to internalize. So I hope that when we send out the recording this weekend, that many of you will take the time to learn and internalize this, and hopefully you'll have a better result in 2024 than you did last year. Thank you so much and have a great trading day.